"Are you all right, sir?" Annie Williams whispered, kneeling beside the stranger in the rain. "Come on now. You can't sit out here in the rain like this." The man did not answer. His head had fallen against the brick wall beside the service entrance of the Grand Marlowe Theater. People moved past him without slowing down. One glanced at the man on the sidewalk and shook his head. "Another drunk face, down by the theater," he muttered. Annie heard the words, but she did not move away. She leaned closer instead. There was no smell of whiskey on him. His fingers trembled against the wet pavement. Annie quickly lifted her umbrella over his head, angling it against the wind so the rain stopped striking his face. "Sir, are you okay? Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice trembling with worry. His eyes opened halfway. He tried to speak, but only a breath came out. Still, she put her bag down and reached for the stranger's shoulder. "Come on," she said. "You can't stay on the sidewalk." He was heavier than he looked. "Help me," she called toward a man passing with his phone to his ear. The man looked over and kept walking. Just then, a couple sharing a polished black umbrella passed close to the curb. The man glanced down at the stranger curled against the sidewalk and curled his lip. "Look at that," he said. Another drunk who drank himself stupid and ended up on the street. The woman with him shifted away as if the rainwater itself had become dirty. She pulled at her boyfriend's coat sleeve. "Gross. Come on, hurry up. Drunks around here always get crazy. Just leave him." They stepped around the stranger without slowing. The woman's heel came down in a puddle, splashing cold water across Annie's pants and the side of the man's soaked jacket. Annie swallowed the anger. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Okay, Annie. One step." The man forced his eyes open again. His breath came broken. Each word dragged out like it had to fight through pain before reaching his mouth. "Medicine," he whispered. I'm having low blood sugar. Heart." Her heart kicked. "My aunt gets low sugar sometimes," Annie said. "You need something sweet, right? Stay awake. Please, stay awake." She looked across the street. A convenience store sat on the corner with bright white lights and a red sign that said, "Open 24 hours. "Hold on just a little longer," Annie said, bending close so he could hear her through the rain. "I'm going to get medicine and something sweet right now. Don't close your eyes, please. I'm begging you." Then she ran. She plunged straight into the rain, crossing toward the convenience store a block away. By the time she shoved open the glass door, she was soaked from her hairline to her socks. "Please," she gasped. "I need emergency heart medicine, the kind that goes under the tongue, a bottle of warm water, and 2 high-sugar chocolate bars. Please hurry." The cashier was a white man. He looked at Annie first, then at the color of her skin. His eyes narrowed with the lazy. He moved slowly toward the shelf behind the counter. "You got money, girl?" he asked, dragging out the words. "We don't do credit here." "I have money," Annie snapped, pulling the folded bills from her pocket. "I have money. Please hurry. A man is dying at the bus stop." She slapped the cash on the counter hard enough that the coins near the register jumped. Only then did the cashier move with any speed. The second he pushed the bag toward her, she grabbed it, hugged it against her chest, and ran back into the rain. When she reached, his body looked too still. "No," Annie cried. "No, no, no. Sir, wake up." She dropped to her knees, slid one arm behind his back, and lifted half his weight against her shoulder. Then she ripped open one of the chocolate bars and pressed it gently to his lips. "Sir, I have the medicine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's here now. Try to take this. Just a little. Please." His mouth barely moved. Annie opened the warm water and poured a small amount between his dry lips, slow enough not to choke him. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, stay with me." Then the man dragged in a breath. His eyes opened. He looked at her. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was still weak, but the gratitude in it was clear. "You saved my life. Everyone else thought I was just some homeless drunk. You stopped." Annie gave him a small, gentle smile and wiped rainwater from her forehead with the back of her hand. "A drunk man wouldn't be sweating cold and shaking like that," she said. "Are you feeling any better?" "A little," he breathed. "My chest. It's not tightening as much." His gaze lowered to the embroidered logo on her jacket, the small gold lettering of the Grand Marlowe Theater stitched above her heart. "You work there?" he asked. At the theater? Yes, sir, Annie said, gathering the torn wrappers and empty packaging from the floor and dropping them into the trash can beside the bench. My name is Annie, Annie Williams. I work the night shift as a server and help with cleanup when they need me. His eyes opened wider, as if the name mattered more than she understood. Annie Williams. Yes, sir. I won't forget. He winced slightly, still weak, then looked at her again. A kind girl like you, he said quietly. Why are you walking alone this late in a neighborhood like this? Aren't you afraid? This area has a reputation. For a moment, something in Annie's face softened and sank. My place is just behind here, sir, she said, in the projects past South Side. People outside look at it and call it dangerous or dirty. But I'm poor. That's where I can afford to live. After a while, you learn how to walk. Keep your head down. Don't stare too long. Don't act like you're lost. Most nights, nobody bothers you if you don't give them a reason to notice you. The man went quiet. From far down the street, headlights began to cut through the rain. She glanced at the bus stop clock and stiffened. It was later than she thought. Too late. Tomorrow morning, she had a rehearsal that could decide everything for the gala. She stood and opened her black fabric umbrella. She held it for a second, then placed the handle into the man's trembling hand. I have to go now, sir, she said. It's still raining hard, and you just started feeling better. You can't sit here getting soaked again. The man stared at the umbrella in his hand, then up at her, stunned. If you give me this, you'll be soaked, he said. How will you get home? Annie turned back, and for the first time that night, her smile came bright and warm, as if the storm were nothing more than something she had passed through many times before. My place is close, she said. I'll run. Just a few steps, and I'll be there. You keep it, okay? Stay here until your people come for you. Don't let yourself get cold again. Before he could call after her, before he could ask another question, Annie pulled her old backpack tight against her chest and stepped out from the shelter. The man sat beneath her umbrella, still holding the handle as if it were something far more valuable than $15. He did not yet know how he would repay her. He only knew he would. Annie reached her small apartment in South Side with rain dripping from her sleeves and hair. She slipped off her soaked jacket, set her old ballet shoes near the radiator, and lay down in the dark with her knees curled toward her chest. Morning came too soon. Annie stood frozen on the polished wooden floor. On the main stage, Victoria Ashford, daughter of one of the theater's wealthiest donors, moved through a ballet solo with polished confidence. The dance was beautiful, sorrowful, and sharp in all the places Annie had made it sharp. Annie's breath caught. No, she whispered. That's my triple turn into the body wave. That corner change. That's mine too. It was her choreography. Victoria had stolen it. Somehow, she had seen the video of Annie practicing after hours and taken every movement as if it had been left there for her. Annie did not wait for the music to end. She ran down the side corridor and shoved open the office door of the dance school director. Director Harold Whitlock sat behind his desk with coffee in one hand and a program schedule in the other. He did not look surprised to see her. Mr. Whitlock, Annie said, breathless. Victoria's solo is mine. I choreographed it. I've been working on it for 3 months. She stole it to take the lead spot tonight. You have to make this right. Whitlock lowered his cup slowly. Stole? He said. Annie, do you understand who you're accusing? What proof do you have besides your mouth? I have my notes. I can dance it for you right now. Every count, every transition, every breath in that piece is mine. Enough. Look at yourself before you start speaking like that in this building. Victoria Ashford was trained by world-class instructors before you ever learned to stand at a bar. And you? You're a black girl from South Side who serves drinks at donor dinners and counts tips in the locker room. Do you honestly think the arts board will believe Victoria stole from you? Annie stared at him. So you won't even check? The door opened behind her. Eleanor Ashford stepped in wearing diamonds at her throat and a cream coat that looked too expensive. Her eyes landed on Annie. So this is the little server trying to smear my daughter. Annie turned. Mrs. Ashford, that dance is mine. Eleanor came close enough for Annie to smell her perfume. She lifted Annie's chin with the tip of a folded fan. Not gently. Close that filthy mouth before you ruin your own life, Eleanor said. If you breathe one more word about that choreography, I will have Mr. Whitlock remove you from this school today. But I made it. You can't just take it. Eleanor laughed once, cold and short. In this world, ownership belongs to the people with the power to protect it. I will call every academy, every company, every director from here to New York, and make sure your name is attached to words like unstable, dishonest, and dangerous. Then we'll see who lets you dance. Whitlock leaned back. You should be grateful Mrs. Ashford's daughter is giving your little steps a stage. They'll become famous because Victoria dances them, not because someone like you dreamed them up after mopping floors. Annie's voice broke. Please. Out, Whitlock said. Put on your server uniform for tonight. Carry water, clear plates, and keep your head down. If you're smart, you'll understand that's the only role this theater has left for you. Annie walked out before her knees gave way. Her new shoes were never bought. Her dance was gone. Her scholarship was gone. Her name, if they chose to destroy it, would be gone too. Please give this video a like if Annie's pain touched your heart. Comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next emotional part of this story. Across the city, high above the financial district, Jonathan Pierce sat in a leather chair behind an ebony desk. In the center of that desk lay Annie's black $15 umbrella. He pressed the intercom. Come in. Mark Ellison, head of private investigations for Pierce Global Group, entered and bowed his head. Chairman, are you feeling better? We were worried last night when your signal disappeared. Jonathan did not answer. He slid forward a small note bearing the Grand Marlowe logo. 2 hours, he said. Find a girl named Annie. 18. Black. Dancer and night server at the Grand Marlowe. I want everything. Leave nothing out. Yes, sir. Less than 2 hours later, Mark returned with a thick folder and a small recording device. His face had changed. Sir, he said, what we found is ugly. Jonathan opened the folder. Speak, Jonathan said. Annie Williams is the real choreographer. Director Whitlock has been suppressing her for months because of her race and background. Eleanor Ashford paid him to give Victoria the gala lead. The same network connects to Richard Vale's attempt to buy the theater at a discount. Jonathan's jaw tightened. The dance? Mark pressed play. Eleanor's voice filled the room. Don't dream of a spotlight that doesn't belong to your color. Then Annie's crying. Then Whitlock telling her to carry water and keep quiet. Jonathan slammed his palm onto the desk and stood. How much? $20 million, routed through consulting fees and donor pledges. Jonathan gave a smile that held no warmth. Summon the fleet. Every executive vehicle, every subsidiary, every branch within driving distance. Mark looked up. Tonight, sir? Tonight. They tried to bury a girl who saved my life in the rain. Jonathan picked up the umbrella. Now we bury their lie in front of every person who paid to applaud it. That evening, the Grand Marlowe's gala began beneath crystal chandeliers and soft music. Wealthy patrons filled the hall in tuxedos and evening gowns. Victoria waited near the wings in a glittering costume, smiling as if the stage already belonged to her. In the shadows, Annie stood in a server uniform, clutching a silver tray and telling herself that maybe girls like her were always meant to watch from the dark. Then the walls trembled. Engines rolled in from every street around the theater. Conversation stopped. Glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Someone whispered, "What is that?" Through the front windows, headlights cut across the plaza. Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Maybachs, and black Escalades swept into formation, one after another, all bearing the mark of Pierce Global Group. They did not simply park. They filled the square, sealed the curbs, lined the entrances, and surrounded the Grand Marlowe in silence. Inside, the orchestra went still. Outside, the headlights turned night into white fire, and Annie, standing unseen with a tray in her hands, had no idea the storm arriving at the theater had come for her. The first security guard at the front entrance tried to step in front of Jonathan Pierce, and immediately understood he had made a mistake. Not because Jonathan raised his voice, not because anyone touched him. It was the silence around the man that did it. The men and women walking behind him did not hurry, did not look confused, did not ask where to go. They moved with the calm precision of people who had already been told exactly what would happen and exactly who would be held responsible if it did not. Jonathan entered the Grand Marlowe with Annie's umbrella in his left hand. The cheap black fabric had dried by then, but one bent rib still gave it a slight crooked shape. It looked absurd beneath the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by velvet ropes, marble columns, and women wearing necklaces worth more than Annie's whole apartment building. Yet Jonathan held it as if it were evidence in a trial. A murmur ran through the lobby. "Is that Jonathan Pierce? I thought he was in London. Why are his cars outside? Did Pierce Global buy in?" Director Harold Whitlock appeared near the main staircase, his tuxedo jacket buttoned wrong in his hurry. Eleanor Ashford followed close behind, her diamonds flashing under the lobby lights. She had the stiff smile of a woman used to controlling rooms before rooms understood they were being controlled. "Mr. Pierce," Whitlock said, spreading his hands. "What an unexpected honor. Had we known you were attending tonight, we would have prepared." "You prepared enough," Jonathan said. The words were quiet. They landed harder than shouting. Whitlock blinked. "I'm sorry?" Jonathan looked past him, toward the closed doors of the auditorium where the orchestra sat frozen, and the audience whispered in rising waves. "The performance stops now." Eleanor gave a polite little laugh, the kind meant to remind everyone that power could wear perfume. "Mr. Pierce, my daughter is about to open the gala. Perhaps whatever business matter this is can wait until after." "No." The single word stripped the smile from her face. Annie stood near the side service corridor with the silver tray still in her hands. The tray had grown heavy. She had seen men like Jonathan from a distance before, men who appeared in donor brochures and newspaper articles, men whose names were carved into wings of museums. She had served coffee to people who spoke about him as if he were not a person but weather, something that could change the market by turning his head. Now he was inside the Grand Marlowe, holding her umbrella. For one confused second, she thought maybe she was so tired that her mind had folded last night into tonight. Then his eyes found her across the lobby. He did not smile, but he saw her. That was worse somehow. Annie had spent most of her life being looked past, looked through, looked over. Jonathan Pierce looked at her as if the whole room had become background. Whitlock followed his gaze and stiffened. "Annie, why are you standing there? Return to service." Jonathan turned his head slowly. "You speak to her like that often?" Whitlock's mouth opened, then closed. "Mr. Pierce, she is an employee and a student under disciplinary review. There has been an unfortunate matter of false accusation." "Careful," Jonathan said. "The next lie you tell may be the one your lawyer cannot walk back." The lobby went still enough for Annie to hear rain tapping against the windows. Eleanor stepped forward. "This is outrageous. You cannot enter a private gala and threaten staff." Jonathan nodded once to the woman standing on his right. She was in her 50s, silver-haired, sharply dressed, with a tablet tucked under one arm. Annie would later learn her name was Margaret Sloan, Jonathan's chief counsel and the one person in Pierce Global who could make millionaires sit down by clearing her throat. Margaret handed a folder to Whitlock. He looked down at the first page. The color drained from his face. Jonathan spoke so the room could hear him now. "At 6:40 this evening, Pierce Global Group completed emergency acquisition of the Grand Marlowe Theater and all related operating rights attached to tonight's gala. The transfer was legal, signed, countersigned, and filed before your first guest finished champagne." A wave of sound moved through the donors. Richard Vale pushed away from a cluster of men near the bar. His face had gone tight. "Jonathan, this is not how business is done." Jonathan looked at him. "No, Richard. Selling a historic theater through shell companies after bribing its director is how business is not done." Richard froze. Annie's fingers loosened around the tray. One empty glass tipped and rolled in a small circle before Ethan Cole appeared from the side hallway and caught it. He looked at Annie, eyes wide. "What is happening?" she whispered. "I don't know," Ethan said. "But I think it's happening to them this time." The auditorium doors opened. Audience members leaned out, craning their necks. Victoria Ashford stood visible on stage beyond them, still in costume, one hand lifted in confusion. Her music had never begun. Her stolen dance hung in the air, waiting for permission to exist. Jonathan walked toward the auditorium. No one stopped him. The heels of his shoes struck the marble with measured sound. Behind him came Margaret, Mark Ellison, two private investigators, and several members of Pierce Global's security team. They did not shove, they did not threaten, they simply occupied space with the certainty of people backed by paperwork, money, and truth. Annie should have stayed where she was. A server did not walk into the center aisle during a gala. A girl under threat of expulsion did not follow the most powerful man in the building into a room full of the people who had just watched her humiliation happen without protest. But her feet moved. She followed at a distance, still holding the tray like a shield. Inside the auditorium, the chandeliers glowed over rows of tuxedos, gowns, white hair, jeweled wrists, and faces trained to hide surprise. The Grand Marlowe had always been proud of its manners. Even its cruelty wore gloves. Jonathan stepped onto the stage. Victoria backed away from him, her expression flickering between fear and offense. "Mr. Pierce," she said, forcing a soft laugh. "I'm not sure what this is about, but I'm scheduled to perform." "I know what you're scheduled to perform," Jonathan said. "That is why I'm here." A screen descended behind him, slow and white. Whispers scattered through the hall. Eleanor rushed down the aisle. "Stop this at once. You have no right to humiliate my daughter." Jonathan turned toward her. "Mrs. Ashford, your daughter humiliated herself when she stole from a girl your money taught her not to see." Gasps broke through the room. Victoria's face twisted. "I didn't steal anything." Jonathan looked toward Mark Ellison. Mark connected a small device to the theater system. The screen flickered, then sharpened. The first image appeared. Studio B, empty chairs stacked near the wall. A clock showing 11:48 p.m. Annie alone in worn practice clothes, moving across the floor. The same opening phrase Victoria had been about to dance. The same 3 turns. The same reach. The same diagonal path. The timestamp sat bright in the corner. Dated weeks earlier. Annie stopped breathing. That was her. Her tired body. Her old shoes. Her private labor. Dragged from darkness into light. The video continued. She fell once, grabbed her ankle, waited, stood again. No audience. No applause. Just the quiet proof of work. Then the next clip played. Victoria outside the half-open studio door. Phone lifted. Recording. The room erupted. Victoria shook her head. "No, that doesn't prove." The next video cut her off. Madam Cross's office. Annie's voice, trembling. Whitlock's voice, cold. Eleanor's voice, clear as glass. "Don't dream of a spotlight that doesn't belong to your color." The sentence entered the room and poisoned all its manners. An older woman in the front row covered her mouth. A man near the aisle lowered his eyes. Someone whispered, "My God." Annie stood at the back of the auditorium, unable to move. She had heard those words once in terror. Hearing them now through the theater speakers made them larger, uglier, undeniable. Jonathan let the silence grow. Then he said, "For years, rooms like this have called themselves refined because they knew how to hide their sins behind music. Tonight, the music waits." He looked directly at Annie. "Miss Annie Williams did not ask me to come here. Last night, she found me half-conscious in the rain while better-dressed people walked over me. She spent the money she had saved for dance shoes to keep me alive. Then she gave me this." He lifted the umbrella. 1,000 eyes turned toward Annie. She wanted to disappear and stand taller at the same time. Jonathan's voice softened, but it carried to the balcony. She protected a stranger when she had every reason to protect only herself. And this morning, this institution repaid that kind of heart by stealing her work, threatening her future, and reminding her that some people still believe skin color decides who deserves the light. Whitlock stumbled to his feet near the aisle. "This is being taken out of context." Margaret Sloane looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Whitlock." He sat. Jonathan turned back to the audience. "Victoria Ashford will not perform this piece. Harold Whitlock is removed from authority effective immediately. Eleanor Ashford and Richard Vale will speak to council before leaving this building, and the scholarship committee will remain seated, because the rightful choreographer is here." Annie's pulse roared in her ears. Mrs. Clara appeared beside her, breathing hard, holding a simple ballet costume in both hands. Ethan stood behind her with the original music file loaded on a tablet. Clara looked at Annie, her eyes wet but steady. "Baby," she said. They finally opened the door. "Now walk through it." Annie looked at the stage, at Jonathan, at the umbrella in his hand, at the audience that had never learned her name until shame forced them to hear it. Her hands shook as she set the silver tray down. For the first time all night, she stepped out of the shadows without asking permission. Mrs. Clara did not give Annie time to think herself back into fear. She took her by the wrist, not roughly, but with the firm hand of a woman who had spent a lifetime pulling young people out of places that wanted to swallow them. "Come on," Clara said, "before they find another way to steal your breath." Annie followed her into the side corridor behind the stage. The sounds of the auditorium faded behind the heavy curtain, but not enough. She could still hear the audience shifting, whispering, coughing into gloved hands. She could hear the scrape of chair legs, the low voice of Jonathan Pierce speaking with someone near the stage, and Eleanor Ashford's sharp protest being cut off by Margaret Sloane's calm reply. The backstage dressing room looked smaller than Annie remembered. Maybe because her chest had tightened. Maybe because the whole world had suddenly turned its face toward her. Costumes hung along one wall. A makeup mirror glowed with round bulbs. A half-empty paper cup of coffee sat beside a box of hairpins. It was an ordinary room, but Annie stepped into it like she was entering the last safe place before a battlefield. Mrs. Clara laid the costume on the chair. It was not the glittering white piece Victoria had worn. It was simple, pale blue with a soft gray underskirt, the color of morning before the rain stopped. Clara had altered it herself from an older production costume, taking in the waist, repairing the shoulder seam, adding hand-stitched ribbon at the back. "I know it isn't fancy," Clara said. Annie touched the fabric. "It's beautiful. It's yours. That makes it enough." Annie looked down at her server uniform. The white shirt still held a faint stain near the cuff, where coffee had splashed during dinner service. Her black vest smelled like lemon polish and kitchen steam. A few minutes ago, she had been carrying glasses for people who would not have remembered her face. Now they were waiting for her to dance. "I can't do this," Annie whispered. Clara turned from the mirror. "Yes, you can." "No, Miss Clara, listen to me." Annie's voice shook. "My feet are bleeding. My shoes are dead. Everyone saw those videos. They heard what she said. If I fall out there now, they'll think maybe Victoria should have danced it after all." Clara stepped close. "Look at me." Annie did. "You don't owe them perfection," Clara said. "You owe yourself the truth." Ethan came in without knocking, breathless, carrying Annie's music tablet and a small bundle of tape. His face was pale from the shock of what had happened, but his eyes were bright. "I loaded the original track," he said. "No edits, no cuts, the same one from Studio B." Annie tried to smile. "You still have a job?" "Probably not." He shrugged. "But I was tired of watching cowards get promoted." Clara gave him a look. "Language. Sorry, ma'am." Annie almost laughed. It came out thin and broken, but it helped. She changed quickly behind a screen while Clara stood guard by the door. Her hands fumbled with the hooks. Ethan turned his back and studied the floor as if the pattern of scuffed wood had become urgent. When Annie stepped out, Clara's face softened. "There she is," she said. Annie sat and pulled her old point shoes from her bag. The sight of them brought back the store counter, the folded bills, the warm water, the stranger's hand trembling around a cheap umbrella. She had given up the new shoes without knowing it would matter to anyone. Now the old ones had to carry everything. Ethan crouched beside her. "May I?" She nodded. He worked carefully, wrapping fresh tape around the weakest part of the box, not too tight, just enough to hold shape for one more dance. Clara knelt on the other side and tied the ribbons, her fingers steady. Annie watched the two of them and felt tears rise again. "I don't want to cry before I go out." "Then don't," Clara said. "Save it for after they stand." Annie looked at her. "You think they will?" Clara finished the knot and pressed Annie's ankle once. "Baby, they already are. They just don't know it yet." A knock came at the door. Everyone went still. Jonathan Pierce stood in the hallway. He did not step inside until Clara gave a small nod. Up close, he looked less like the man Annie had found in the rain, and more like the name people whispered with caution. His suit was dark, his posture controlled, his face still marked by last night's weakness only if someone knew to look for it. In his hand, he still held the umbrella. Annie stood too fast and nearly lost her balance. "Careful," Jonathan said. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "For what?" Annie did not know how to answer. "For being wet last night. For crying tonight. For causing a scene. For being poor in a room where poverty was treated like bad manners." Jonathan seemed to understand without making her say it. You have nothing to apologize for. Annie looked toward the stage. Did you really buy the theater? Yes. Because of me? Jonathan's eyes moved to the umbrella, then back to her. Because of what they did to you. Because of what they were trying to do to this place. Because last night, when I had nothing in my hands, you still treated me like a man worth saving. I didn't know who you were. That is why it mattered. Annie swallowed. I don't want people to think you bought me that scholarship. I didn't, he said, and I won't. I opened the door they locked. You still have to walk through it. She looked down at her shoes. What if I can't? Jonathan did not answer quickly. When he did, his voice was low enough that only the four of them could hear. Then you will still have told the truth in a room built to silence you. But Annie, I watched that rehearsal video. A thief can copy steps. She cannot copy the reason they exist. That landed deeper than praise. From the stage, a staff member called, 2 minutes. Ethan stood. I'll cue the music from the booth. I've got you. Clara brushed a loose strand of hair from Annie's forehead. Shoulders down, chin easy. Don't fight the floor. Let it remember you. Annie breathed in, then out. The fear did not leave. It stayed inside her ribs like a second heartbeat. But beneath it, something steadier began to rise. She walked to the curtain. The auditorium was still restless. People had their phones out now. Some whispered Annie's name as if trying it for the first time. Victoria stood near the far wing with her arms crossed, eyes red, her costume bright beneath the stage lights. Eleanor was seated in the front row between a Pierce attorney and a security officer, rage stiffening every line of her body. Whitlock was gone from his chair. Richard Vale stood near the back, watched by 2 men in dark suits. Jonathan stepped onto the stage before Annie did. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you came tonight expecting a performance. You will still receive one. But this time, it will be danced by the artist who created it. He turned toward the wing. Miss Annie Williams. For 1 second, Annie could not move. Then Clara's hand touched her back. Go on, she whispered. Annie stepped into the light. The heat of it struck her face first, then the silence. 1,000 eyes, maybe more, old donors in pearls, critics with notebooks, board members who had smiled through cruelty, ushers standing frozen by the walls, servers peeking from the doors. People who had never seen her except from the angle of a tray now looked straight at her. Her feet found center stage. The music began. The opening note was thin and low, like rainwater slipping along a curb. Annie bent forward, one hand near the floor, her body folded into itself. For the first few counts, she let the room feel her smallness, let them see the girl they had almost erased. Then she rose. Her first turn was clean. The second cut sharper. On the third, pain flashed up her right foot. But she used it, sending the movement through her spine into the wave Victoria had stolen but never understood. This was not decoration. It was memory. It was a body learning to keep walking through weather. Annie crossed the diagonal, each step striking the floor with quiet force. She saw nothing clearly now, only light and shadow and the dark shape of Jonathan standing near the wing with her umbrella lowered at his side. She thought of South Side streets, Aunt Lena's tired hands, Mrs. Clara tying ribbons, Ethan risking his job, the stranger in the rain, and the sentence that had carried her here. Being wet doesn't make a man worthless. Her shoes softened under her. For a breath, her balance slipped. A murmure rose. Annie caught herself, not gracefully at first, but honestly. She changed the fall into a low sweep, one palm touching the stage before she pushed back up. The room went still again, but different this time. They had seen the danger. They had seen her choose not to break. The music climbed. Annie moved faster. The piece became less about rain and more about refusing to drown. She leapt, landed, turned through pain, and opened her arms toward the balcony as if asking every locked door in the city who gave it the right to stay closed. The final phrase came from somewhere beyond technique. She dropped to one knee, lifted one hand over her head like an umbrella, then slowly stood beneath the light she had been told did not belong to her. The music ended. No one moved. For one awful second, Annie heard only her own breathing. Then an older woman in the front row stood up, Mrs. Clara. A moment later, Ethan stood in the lighting booth behind the glass. Then a man in the balcony. Then 2 donors near the aisle. Then a wave moved through the auditorium until the entire Grand Marlowe rose to its feet. The applause hit Annie like weather. She bowed once, but tears blurred the floor beneath her. Not because they had finally clapped. Because the dance had survived. Because she had survived with it. Near the wing, Jonathan Pierce did not applaud at first. He simply watched her with a look Annie could not name. Then he brought his hands together, slowly, with the respect of a man paying a debt that had only begun. The applause did not end quickly. It rolled through the Grand Marlowe in waves, from the orchestra seats to the balcony, from donors who had paid for their names in gold letters to ushers who had spent years standing at the back of the room. Annie stood at center stage with one hand pressed lightly against her ribs, trying to breathe like a dancer, not like a girl who had just had her life dragged through fire in front of strangers. Her legs trembled. The old shoes had carried her through, but barely. She could feel one ribbon loosening at her ankle, the satin damp where her heel had bled through again. Still, she kept her spine straight. Mrs. Clara had always said the bow mattered because it told the audience you had given them something and still belonged to yourself afterward. Annie bowed once more. When she lifted her head, she saw Victoria Ashford at the far wing, pale under stage makeup, her mouth tight with humiliation. Victoria's eyes were not full of regret. They were full of disbelief, as if the worst part was not being exposed, but being exposed by someone she had decided did not count. Eleanor Ashford rose from her seat in the front row. "This is theater," she said sharply, clapping once in a cruel, performative way. "Very moving, very dramatic. But let us not confuse emotion with legality." The applause weakened. People turned. Eleanor stepped into the aisle, diamonds glittering at her throat. "My daughter has been publicly humiliated by edited footage and accusations staged by a man who bought this building hours ago. I will not allow our family name to be dragged through mud by a servant girl in a corporate ambush." Annie flinched at the word servant, but she did not step back. Jonathan Pierce walked onto the stage again, the umbrella still in his hand. He did not look angry now. That made him more dangerous. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "you have mistaken silence for permission all evening. Do not mistake it again." Eleanor laughed, but her voice shook. "You think your money frightens me?" "No," Jonathan said. "I think evidence does." Margaret Sloane stood from her seat near the front aisle. "For the record, Mrs. Ashford, the footage shown tonight was taken from the Grand Marlowe security archive, the off-site insurance backup, and a privately authenticated phone recording. Chain of custody has already been documented." A man near the aisle whispered, "Good Lord." Richard Vale tried to move toward the rear exit, but two Pierce security officers shifted quietly into his path. They did not touch him. They did not need to. Eleanor saw it. Her eyes narrowed. "You cannot detain people here." "No one is being detained," Margaret said. "But if Mr. Vale leaves before city detectives arrive, that will be included in the report our counsel is filing tonight." The word detectives traveled through the auditorium faster than any music had. Annie looked toward Jonathan. "Detectives?" He turned slightly, his voice softer when he spoke to her, not because of the dance alone. "There are contracts, bribes, threats, and a planned transfer of this theater built on fraud. What they did to you was one piece of a larger rot." Harold Whitlock appeared near the stage door between two staff members, his face red, his hair damp at the temples. He had clearly tried to gather enough dignity to return and failed. "This is absurd. I have served this institution for 22 years. And sold it for 20 million, Jonathan said. The room went still again. Whitlock's lips parted. "That is a lie." Mark Ellison stepped forward from the side aisle. He held up a tablet. "We have bank records, consulting invoices, and a recorded call between you and Richard Vale discussing the Ashford donation, Miss Williams's removal from the scholarship pool, and the sale price of the theater after the gala." Whitlock's eyes darted toward Eleanor. That look said more than any confession. Victoria finally spoke from the wing. "Mom?" Eleanor turned sharply. "Be quiet." It was the first honest thing Annie had heard from her all night. Victoria stared at her mother, then at Whitlock, then at the audience. For a second she looked younger, stripped of diamonds and costumes and borrowed grief. But the second passed. She lifted her chin. "This was supposed to be my night," she said. Annie, still standing under the lights, answered before she could stop herself. It was never yours. The words were not loud, but they carried. Victoria's face crumpled with anger. You think one dance makes you better than me? No, Annie said. Her voice surprised her by staying steady. I think stealing one proves you knew I was good enough to fear. A murmur moved through the crowd. Somewhere in the balcony, someone said, That's right. Mrs. Clara's hand covered her mouth, but her eyes shone. Jonathan gave Annie the stage with a small nod, as if to say she did not need him to answer for her anymore. The president of the scholarship committee, a gray-haired woman named Dr. Helen Morris, stood slowly from the third row. She had not spoken all evening. Annie recognized her from the program booklet. Former principal dancer, retired dean, the kind of woman whose approval students whispered about in hallways. Miss Williams, Dr. Morris said, did you create that choreography yourself? Yes, ma'am. How long did you work on it? 3 months, mostly after my shifts, sometimes in Studio B if no one had booked it. And the movement vocabulary? The final umbrella gesture? Annie swallowed. That came from my life, ma'am. Walking home in the rain. Working nights. Trying to keep going when nobody was watching. Dr. Morris looked at the other committee members. One by one, they nodded. Some looked ashamed. Some looked relieved to be given a right answer after sitting too long with the wrong one. Dr. Morris faced the audience. Then the scholarship committee will reconvene immediately. But I see no reason to pretend the truth is unclear. Miss Williams's work was original. Her performance tonight was extraordinary. Any prior decision made under the influence of Director Whitlock is void. Whitlock made a strangled sound. You can't do that. I just did, Dr. Morris said. For the first time that night, Annie almost smiled. A door opened near the back of the auditorium. 2 uniformed police officers entered with a plainclothes detective, followed by a representative from the city attorney's office. The gala guests watched in stunned silence as Margaret Sloan walked down the aisle to meet them, tablet in hand, already speaking in a low, precise voice. Eleanor gripped her purse. This is harassment. The detective, a broad woman with tired eyes and a calm face, approached her. Mrs. Ashford, I'm Detective Ramirez. We'd like to ask you some questions about payments made to Harold Whitlock and threats made against Annie Williams. I will not be spoken to like a criminal. Detective Ramirez glanced at the stage, then back at Eleanor. Then don't act surprised when people ask why you talked like one. A few people gasped. Someone near the back clapped once, then stopped when his wife grabbed his sleeve. Eleanor's face hardened, but fear had entered it now. Real fear. Not fear of poverty or hunger or walking home alone, but fear of losing the one thing people like her thought money made permanent, reputation. Richard Vale tried again to speak. Jonathan, we can settle this privately. Jonathan looked at him. You should have thought about privacy before you tried to steal a theater and destroy a girl. Annie stepped back from center stage. The room had become too much. Too many faces. Too many voices. Too much justice arriving all at once after a morning when she had begged for one adult to believe her. Ethan appeared at the stage steps. Annie, I need air, she whispered. He helped her down, though she hated that she needed help. Mrs. Clara met them in the wing and wrapped a shawl around Annie's shoulders. You did it, Clara said. Annie shook her head. I don't know what I did. You told the truth with your feet. That's more than most folks manage with their mouths. Behind them, Victoria was crying now, but quietly. Eleanor was speaking to Detective Ramirez through clenched teeth. Whitlock sat in the front row with his head in his hands. The audience was no longer an audience. It had become a jury, a witness, a city forced to look at what it had been willing to applaud. Jonathan came to Annie near the curtain. He did not crowd her. He stood a respectful distance away. Are you all right? He asked. Annie let out a breath that was almost a laugh. People keep asking me that after everything happens. Then answer honestly. She looked down at her shoes. The right one had split near the side. A thin red stain had reached the ribbon. I'm tired, she said, and my feet hurt, and I'm scared tomorrow they'll twist this into something ugly. They will try, Jonathan said. People who survive by controlling the story always try to rewrite the first honest sentence. What happens now? Now, he said, looking toward the auditorium. We make sure the record is louder than their money. At that moment, Dr. Morris stepped onto the stage again, with the scholarship committee behind her. The house lights dimmed halfway. Conversations stopped. Even Eleanor turned despite herself. Dr. Morris held a small envelope, but her eyes were on Annie. "Miss Annie Williams," she said, voice clear, "on behalf of the Grand Marlowe Youth Arts Scholarship Committee, pending final administrative processing under new oversight, we are naming you this year's recipient." The words seemed to take a long time to reach her. Ethan grabbed her hand. Clara started crying first. Annie stood very still, afraid that if she moved, the whole moment might scatter. Jonathan leaned slightly toward her and said, "That part is yours. No one bought it. No one gave it out of pity. You earned it before I ever knew your name." Annie walked back onto the stage because Clara nudged her and Ethan whispered, "Go." The applause started again. Smaller than before, but deeper. Less shocked. More certain. She accepted the envelope from Dr. Morris with both hands. "Thank you," Annie said into the microphone. Then she paused. There were 1,000 things she could have said about pain, theft, race, money, and fear. Instead, she looked toward the young servers standing near the back doors, the janitors in dark uniforms, the ushers, the students who had been told to wait their turn while other people cut the line. "I hope," she said, "the next girl doesn't need a billionaire to make people believe her." The room went quiet. Jonathan lowered his eyes, not in shame exactly, but in agreement. Annie stepped back from the microphone. Outside, the headlights of the Pierce fleet still burned through the rain-washed windows, surrounding the Grand Marlowe like a wall. But inside, for the first time in her life, Annie was not standing behind anyone else's shadow. The scholarship announcement should have been the end of the night. In another world, Annie might have gone home with the envelope pressed to her chest. Aunt Lena might have cried over it at the kitchen table, and the city might have learned her name in a gentler way. But the Grand Marlowe had carried too many secrets for too many years. One dance could open the door. It could not clean the whole house. Detective Ramirez asked the audience to remain seated while officers took initial statements. The request was polite, but the doors were guarded now, and the Pierce security team stood along the walls with calm faces and folded hands. No one looked trapped. They looked witnessed. Annie sat in the first row with Mrs. Clara on one side and Ethan on the other. The scholarship envelope rested in her lap. Her fingers kept touching its edge, as if checking that it had not vanished. Her feet had begun to throb in a deep, delayed way, and the split in her right shoe had widened. Clara noticed and reached into the pocket of her cardigan. "Give me that foot," she said. "Miss Clara, not here. Child, half this room just watched your blood earn more truth than their money ever did. Give me the foot." Annie obeyed because arguing with Clara was harder than dancing injured. Clara slipped the shoe off carefully. Annie bit down on the inside of her cheek. Ethan leaned forward. "That bad?" "It's fine." "It is not fine," Clara said. "It is ballet fine, which means terrible, but survivable." That made Ethan laugh under his breath. Annie almost did too, until she saw Victoria standing near the stage steps, arms wrapped around herself, no longer surrounded by assistants, photographers, or admirers. Her costume glittered under the sidelights, but without music and applause it looked like armor. For one moment, Annie felt something she did not expect. Not forgiveness. Not pity exactly. Something smaller and more complicated. Victoria had stolen from her. Victoria had lied. Victoria had watched Annie get humiliated and said nothing. But now Victoria looked like someone waking up in a room her mother had built and realizing there were locks on the inside too. Eleanor Ashford did not look at her daughter. She stood near Detective Ramirez, chin high, speaking through clenched teeth while Margaret Sloane listened with a patience that felt surgical. "My attorney will be here within minutes," Eleanor said. "I hope so," Ramirez answered. "He can explain why your charitable foundation made 3 payments to a private account controlled by Harold Whitlock. They were donations." "To a private account? I don't handle every financial detail." "You handled enough to threaten an 18-year-old girl on a recording." Eleanor's eyes flicked toward Annie. "That girl is not as innocent as she looks." Jonathan, who had been speaking quietly with Mark Ellison nearby, turned at once. Detective Ramirez raised one hand without looking at him. "Mr. Pierce, I've got it." Then she looked back at Eleanor. Mrs. Ashford, I've been a cop 27 years. I know the difference between a scared kid and a grown woman trying to bury one. Eleanor's mouth closed. Annie looked down at her lap. She had been called girl, server, liar, unstable, ungrateful, dangerous. Hearing someone say scared kid in that plain, unembarrassed way nearly undid her. She blinked hard. Jonathan came over and crouched slightly, not enough to make a scene, just enough to speak without forcing her to look up at a powerful man standing over her. "Your aunt has been contacted," he said. Annie's head snapped up. "Aunt Lena? My office reached her from your emergency contact on file. She's on her way. A car is bringing her." Annie's stomach turned. "She's going to think I got arrested. She was told you were safe. That won't stop her from thinking I got arrested." For the first time all night, Jonathan's mouth moved toward a real smile. She sounded like a woman who would prefer to confirm that herself. "Oh no," Annie whispered. Clara patted her knee. "Good. Somebody ought to fuss over you properly." Across the auditorium, Harold Whitlock was seated between two officers, sweating through his collar. His confidence had collapsed into small, twitchy movements. He kept rubbing his thumb against his wedding ring and looking toward Richard Vale, as if the man who had bought his loyalty might still buy him out of consequence. Richard was worse. He had stopped pretending. His tie hung loose, his face was gray, and he spoke rapidly into a phone until a Pierce attorney leaned in and said something that made him lower it. Mark Ellison joined Jonathan near Annie's row. "The city attorney's office has enough to open a formal investigation tonight. Financial crimes will want the records by morning. We also found the draft sale agreement with Vale's shell company." Jonathan's face hardened. "The clause about workforce restructuring?" "Yes. Custodial staff, service workers, and scholarship, track students without private sponsorship, were to be removed within 90 days after transfer." Mrs. Clara stopped wrapping Annie's foot. "Removed," she said. Mark looked at her respectfully. That was the word they used. Clara's fingers tightened around the bandage. "I've worked in this building 34 years. Jonathan turned to her. "And you will continue to, if you want." Clara looked up. "Don't promise old women things in emotional moments, Mr. Pierce." "I don't." She studied him, then nodded once. "Good." Annie watched the exchange and understood something she had missed before. This was bigger than her dance. If the sale had gone through, Clara would have been gone. The ushers who knew every balcony seat by memory would have been gone. The janitors who cleaned glitter from dressing room floors at 2 in the morning would have been gone. Students like her would have been quietly pushed out and replaced by polished names with private coaches and donor parents. Her stolen choreography had been one theft inside a larger one. The side doors opened, and Aunt Lena entered like a storm wearing a laundromat uniform. Her hair scarf was tied crooked, her coat was buttoned wrong, and her eyes scanned the room until they found Annie. Annie Mae Williams. Annie stood too fast. "Aunt Lena, I'm okay." Lena crossed the aisle, took Annie's face in both hands, and looked her over the way mothers and aunts do when they need proof from bone and skin, not words. "You bleeding?" "A little." "You arrested?" "No." "You embarrass yourself?" Annie hesitated. Clara said, "She was magnificent." Ethan added, "Like, historically magnificent." Lena looked at him. "I don't know you." "Yes, ma'am, Ethan. Lighting." Then Lena pulled Annie into her arms. Annie stiffened at first because the whole room could see, then folded. She had held herself together through rain, theft, threats, performance, applause, and cameras. She could not hold herself together through Aunt Lena's hand on the back of her head. "I was scared," Annie whispered. "I know," Lena said. "But you're here." Jonathan stepped back, giving them space. Lena noticed him over Annie's shoulder. Her eyes narrowed. "You the man from the rain?" "Yes, ma'am," Jonathan said. "You made all this mess?" "I uncovered it." "That's not what I asked." A few nearby people went silent. Ethan looked at the floor to hide a smile. Jonathan accepted the correction. "Yes, ma'am." "Some of it." Lena released Annie but kept one arm around her. "She gave you her umbrella?" "She did." "And her shoe money?" "I learned that this morning." Lena looked him up and down, from his tailored suit to the quiet army of lawyers and security behind him. "Then you better not be playing savior for one night and disappearing by breakfast." Jonathan's face changed. The question, blunt as it was, seemed to earn his respect. I won't disappear. Good, because folks like us have seen powerful people discover a conscience for the length of a newspaper photograph. Jonathan nodded. Then don't judge me by tonight. Judge me by what changes after it. Lena held his gaze a moment longer. I can do that. Detective Ramirez approached Annie with a small recorder. Miss Williams, I know you've had a long night. I need your statement while it's fresh. But we can do it with your aunt present. Annie looked at Lena, then at Clara and Ethan. Okay. They moved to a quieter side lounge where the walls were lined with framed photographs of dancers from decades past. Most of the faces were white. Annie noticed that more clearly than she ever had before. Ramirez kept her voice gentle and her questions clean. When did Annie first create the dance? When did she notice Victoria performing it? Who threatened her? What exactly was said? Annie answered as best she could. Sometimes her voice shook. Sometimes Lena's hand found hers under the table. Sometimes Clara filled in dates when Annie could not remember them because fear had blurred the morning. When the statement ended, Ramirez turned off the recorder. You did well, she said. Annie let out a tired breath. It doesn't feel like doing well. It rarely does at first. Outside the lounge, the gala was ending in fragments. Guests left in silence or tight clusters, passing between police, attorneys, and Pierce staff. Some avoided Annie's eyes. Others looked as if they wanted to apologize but did not know whether apology could reach across that much damage. A few older patrons stopped near the doorway. One woman with silver hair and pearl earrings touched her own chest before speaking. Miss Williams, she said, I should have stood when I heard that recording, before your dance. I'm sorry I waited for someone else. Annie did not know what to say. Lena answered for her. Then don't wait next time. The woman nodded, eyes wet. No, I won't. It was a small thing, not enough. But Annie had learned that sometimes small things were where large things began. Near midnight, Jonathan returned with Margaret Sloane. The press is outside, Margaret said. A lot of them. We can take you out through the West Service corridor. Annie almost laughed. I came in through service doors all year. Now I get escorted out through one? Jonathan looked toward the main lobby, where cameras flashed beyond the glass. You can walk out any door you choose. But tonight, I would rather protect your peace than prove a point. Aunt Lena nodded. West door. Annie did not argue. As they moved through the back corridor, Annie passed the service station where she had filled water pitchers only hours earlier. One of the younger servers, a girl named Marisol, stood there holding a stack of folded napkins. You really danced like that in those shoes? Marisol asked. Annie glanced down and gave a tired smile. Don't tell my feet. Marisol smiled back, then grew serious. I'm glad they saw you. Annie swallowed. Me too. At the west exit, a black car waited under the awning. Rain had faded to a mist. The city smelled washed and cold. Jonathan paused before Annie got in. Tomorrow morning, he said. There will be noise. Articles, accusations, people pretending they always supported you. Let my office handle the noise. You rest. Annie looked at him. Why are you doing all this? He glanced toward the umbrella, now folded under his arm. Because last night, you did not ask whether I was worth saving. That's different. No, Jonathan said. It's the same question, just with more witnesses. Annie got into the car beside Aunt Lena. As they pulled away, she looked back at the Grand Marlowe. The Pierce vehicles still surrounded it. Not roaring now. Not flashing. Just present. For the first time, the building did not look like a place that had rejected her. It looked like a place being forced to remember what it was built for. By morning, Annie's name was everywhere. It was on television screens above diner counters, on phones held by people waiting for the bus, on the front page of local news sites, and in headlines that made her life sound cleaner than it felt. Billionaire stops gala to defend young dancer. Grand Marlowe scandal rocks arts community. Southside ballet student wins scholarship after stolen choreography exposed. Aunt Lena turned the television off before the third anchor could say, inspiring. Annie sat at the kitchen table in the same sweatshirt she had slept in, one foot resting on a folded towel, the other tucked under the chair. The apartment smelled like coffee, toast, and the menthol cream Lena had rubbed into her ankles before breakfast. The scholarship envelope lay on the table beside a plate of scrambled eggs Annie had barely touched. "You need to eat," Lena said. "I'm not hungry. You danced on a bleeding foot, got threatened by rich people, gave a statement to police, and became breaking news before sunrise. Your body does not care whether your feelings are full." Annie picked up the fork because arguing would take more strength than chewing. From the living room, her cracked phone buzzed again. It had not stopped all morning. Unknown numbers. Messages from classmates who had ignored her for months. Reporters. Old church friends. People who wrote things like, "I always knew you were special," though Annie could not remember them ever saying her name in the hallway. She did not open most of them. One message from Ethan read, "You alive?" Annie typed back, "Barely." He replied, "Same. Also, I think I'm famous in the lighting booth community." For the first time that morning, Annie smiled. A knock came at the door. Lena stiffened. "You expecting somebody?" "No." Lena looked through the peephole, then opened the door halfway. A woman in a navy coat stood outside with 2 security men behind her in the hall. Annie recognized her from the night before. Margaret Sloan, Jonathan Pierce's chief counsel. She held a paper bag in one hand and a folder in the other. "Good morning, Miss Williams," Margaret said to Lena. "Miss Williams, Mr. Pierce asked that I check in personally." "May I come in?" Lena did not move. "Depends. Are you here with cameras?" "No." "Reporters?" "No." "People trying to turn my niece into a poster child before she's had breakfast?" Margaret's expression softened by half an inch. "Absolutely not." Lena opened the door. Margaret stepped in and placed the paper bag on the table. Fresh bandages, arnica cream, and a breakfast sandwich from the cafe downstairs. Mr. Pierce was told dancers often pretend coffee counts as food. He asked me not to accept that. Annie looked at the bag, embarrassed. "He didn't have to do that." "No," Margaret said. "But he has a habit of doing what he thinks should have been done already." Lena crossed her arms. "And what does he think should be done now?" Margaret sat only after Lena pointed to a chair. First, no press access without Annie's written permission. Second, Pierce Global is assigning counsel to protect her from defamation or retaliation. Third, Mr. Pierce would like Annie and you to come to the Grand Marlowe this afternoon, not for a public event, but to discuss what changes are being made. Annie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Changes?" "Yes." "Already?" Margaret opened the folder. "Harold Whitlock has been formally removed pending investigation. Derek Malone, the security director, was placed on administrative leave after we confirmed he tampered with camera access. Eleanor Ashford's foundation accounts are being subpoenaed. Richard Vale is facing a civil fraud filing by noon." Lena let out a low whistle. "That man moves fast. He moves fastest when angry." Annie looked down at her hands. "I don't want people losing jobs because of me." Margaret's eyes sharpened, not unkindly. "They are not losing jobs because of you. They are losing positions because of what they did when they believed no one important was watching." Annie felt the words settle. No one important. That had always been the rule, hadn't it? Things happened to girls like her in empty hallways and offices with closed doors because the people doing them never expected the room to repeat what it heard. Margaret continued. "Mr. Pierce also asked me to tell you that the scholarship stands. The committee confirmed it again this morning. In writing." She slid a letter across the table. Annie touched the paper but did not pick it up right away. Why does it still feel like someone can take it back? Lena's face changed. She knew that feeling. Poor people knew how quickly good news could be reversed by fine print, missing forms, late fees, and people who said there had been a misunderstanding. Margaret answered carefully. "Because people have taken things from you before. This time, there will be lawyers between them and the door." At noon, a black Pierce Global car waited at the curb. Mr. Jenkins from 2B stood by the stairwell in a brown cardigan, pretending to check his mailbox. "You going somewhere important, Miss Annie?" he asked. "I guess so." He nodded toward the car. "Good. Make them open the door for you." The driver did. Annie blushed when he held it. But Lena climbed in like she had been expecting proper treatment all her life. The ride downtown felt strange in daylight. South Side slid past the tinted window, corner stores, boarded windows, a church sign announcing Sunday chicken dinners, kids in hoodies walking to school with backpacks slung low. Then the streets widened. Buildings grew taller. The sidewalks looked cleaner. People who lived in one side of the city often spoke about the other side as if it were a different country. But it was only a 15-minute drive. At the Grand Marlowe, the plaza looked nothing like it had the night before. Most of the Pierce vehicles were gone, replaced by news vans behind barricades and a smaller security detail near the doors. Reporters turned the moment Annie stepped out, but Pierce staff formed a quiet path before anyone could get close. "Annie, how does it feel? Did Jonathan Pierce buy your silence? Were you aware of the investigation?" Lena gripped Annie's hand. "Keep walking." Inside, the lobby was stripped of gala glamour. No champagne, no music, no donors pretending not to stare. Staff members stood in small groups near the staircase. Servers, ushers, janitors, box office clerks, stagehands, people Annie knew by first name. People who had seen everything and still had to show up for work. Marisol, the young server from the night before, gave Annie a shy wave. Mrs. Clara came down the stairs with a cane Annie had never seen her use in public. "Don't you look like you've been through war and breakfast?" Annie hugged her. "You too. I've been through worse than breakfast." Ethan appeared behind her, hair messy, eyes tired. "I have news. They didn't fire me." "Good. They promoted me temporarily to acting systems witness, which I think means I'm supposed to tell lawyers where the buttons are." "That sounds important." "It feels terrifying." A door opened at the top of the grand staircase. Jonathan Pierce stepped out with Mark Ellison and two attorneys behind him. He had changed into a charcoal suit, but his face still carried the strain of the night before. In his right hand was Annie's umbrella. The lobby quieted. Jonathan came down the stairs and stopped not at the center, not above anyone, but on the same floor as the staff. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "Most of you have given more to this theater than the people whose names were printed on last night's invitations. I know that now. I should have known sooner." No one spoke. "The Grand Marlowe will remain open. No service staff, custodial workers, stagehands, ushers, or scholarship students will be dismissed as part of the ownership change. Wages will be reviewed. Benefits will be reviewed. Complaints previously buried by management will be reopened under outside oversight." A woman from wardrobe began to cry quietly. Jonathan looked toward her, then toward the rest of them. This building was nearly sold by people who thought history was real estate and labor was disposable. That ends today. Annie stood beside Lena, unsure what to do with the way people glanced at her. Not with resentment, but with gratitude she had not earned alone. Jonathan's gaze found her. "And because a young artist reminded me what this place should have been protecting all along. Pierce Global is establishing the Annie Williams Foundation for Young Artists. It will fund training, shoes, housing support, legal advocacy, and performance opportunities for students who have talent but not money." The lobby erupted, not like a gala audience, but like working people hearing rent might finally be paid and children might finally get a chance. Annie stared at him. "Mr. Pierce." He stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "I know. You didn't ask for your name on anything." "No, I didn't." "Then you can help decide how it is used." That silenced her. Lena looked at Jonathan. "You mean that?" "Yes, ma'am." Annie looked around the lobby. Clara wiping her eyes. Ethan grinning like he could not help it. Marisol whispering to another server. Old ushers standing straighter than yesterday. The building felt different, not fixed, not yet, but opened. For the first time, Annie understood that last night had not only returned a dance to her, it had started a reckoning. Jonathan placed the umbrella gently into her hands. "You may want this back," he said, "though I'd like to borrow what it stands for a little longer." Annie looked down at the bent black fabric, then at the doors where reporters waited outside. She held the umbrella against her chest. "Then make sure it covers more than me," she said. Jonathan nodded. "That is the plan." The lobby meeting ended, but people did not leave right away. They stayed in small circles, speaking in lowered voices, as if the Grand Marlowe had become a church after a funeral. A few staff members came to Annie one by one, not with speeches, just a touch on the shoulder. "A proud of you, baby." A quiet, Thank you. A nod from a janitor, who had never said more than good evening to her in 6 months. Annie did not know where to put any of it. By late afternoon, Margaret Sloane led Annie, Aunt Lena, Mrs. Clara, Ethan, and Jonathan into a private conference room above the lobby. The room had long windows overlooking the plaza, where reporters still waited behind barricades. Some held umbrellas. Some had cameras aimed at the entrance as though Annie might emerge and become a headline on command. Annie sat near the end of the table, the $15 umbrella across her lap. It felt strange to hold it indoors. Stranger still to see it reflected in the polished table beside folders marked with the Pierce Global logo. Jonathan stood by the window. I want you to understand something before this goes further, he said. A foundation with your name on it will attract attention. Some of that attention will be good. Some won't. People who were comfortable ignoring you may try to use you now. Aunt Lena folded her arms. That's what I said. Yes, ma'am, Jonathan said. And you were right. Annie looked at the folders. I don't know how to run a foundation. You won't have to, Margaret said. There will be a board, legal staff, financial oversight, scholarship administrators. What Mr. Pierce is offering is not a job, it's a voice. A voice in what? In deciding who it helps, Jonathan said. And how we make sure the children who need help don't have to beg for it in rooms that already decided against them. Annie's thumb moved along the umbrella handle. Children like me, children like you, Clara said, and children like I used to be. Everyone turned toward her. Mrs. Clara sat with both hands around a paper cup of coffee. Without the backstage bustle around her, she looked older than Annie had ever allowed herself to notice. Her wrists were thin. Her shoulders carried years of costume racks, late nights, and dreams put away carefully so they would not bother anyone. I was 16 when I first came to this theater, Clara said. Not this room, of course. Girls like me did not sit in rooms like this then. I came through the alley door to deliver alterations for a seamstress, who paid me in cash and leftover fabric. I could dance, too. Not like Annie, but I could move. She smiled a little. Not sadly, but not happily either. There was a summer program here. I asked about it. The man at the desk told me my body wasn't right for classical lines. He never saw me dance. Lena's face tightened. He didn't need to. He had already seen enough, right? Clara nodded. That was the way of it. You learned early what doors were worth knocking on and what doors would only bruise your hand. Annie looked down at Clara's cane. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because old pain can become furniture if you leave it in the same corner long enough. You stop pointing it out. Clara looked at Jonathan. If you put that child's name on a foundation, don't make it pretty just for donors. Make it useful. Shoes, bus passes, meal money, safe rides after rehearsal, someone to call when a director says something ugly behind a closed door. That would have changed more lives than another bronze plaque. Jonathan did not interrupt. When Clara finished, he turned to Margaret. Write that down. Margaret already had. Ethan raised a hand slightly. Can I say something? Jonathan looked at him. Please. Backup systems, cameras, reporting. Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly aware that he was speaking in front of people who could buy satellites. What happened to Annie got caught because the insurance archive kept copies, but nobody normal knows how to get that. Students need a way to report abuse without the same people they're reporting deleting it. Margaret nodded. Anonymous reporting system, independent from theater management. And protected storage, Ethan added. Off-site, encrypted, with audit logs. Lena stared at him. He cleared his throat. Sorry, tech stuff. No, Lena said. Keep talking that tech stuff if it keeps people from lying on my niece. Annie smiled despite herself. Jonathan turned to Annie. What about you? The room grew quiet. Annie looked out the window. A reporter lifted a camera toward the glass, but the reflection kept Annie hidden. She thought of last night, of kneeling in the rain. She thought of the cashier asking if she had money before he would move. She thought of Whitlock's office, Eleanor's fan under her chin, Victoria's stolen dance. The room watching her as if her pain had become entertainment. I don't want this to be about making one lucky girl famous, Annie said. I don't want kids from Southside to think they have to suffer beautifully before anyone helps them. Jonathan's eyes stayed on her. She continued, Slower now. If there's a foundation, it should find them early. Before the shoes are dead. Before the teacher gives up on them. Before they think they're only allowed to enter through service doors. Margaret wrote that down too. And it has to help boys, Annie added, and kids who aren't dancers. Music, theater, lighting, costumes, writing. Everybody thinks the person on stage is the only artist. They're not. Ethan sat a little straighter. Clara whispered, "That's right." Jonathan came back to the table and sat. Not at the head, but across from Annie. "Then that is what it will be." "How do I know?" Annie asked. No one scolded her for the question. That alone felt new. Jonathan folded his hands. "You don't. Not yet. Trust should not be demanded from people who have been disappointed. So we put it in writing. You, your aunt, Mrs. Bell, Mr. Cole, and others chosen from the staff and student community will have seats on the advisory council. Pierce Global funds it. The council shapes it. Annual reports will be public. Complaints will be reviewed outside the theater." Lena looked at Margaret. "Plain English?" Margaret said. "He pays. Annie and the people affected get a real say. The receipts are public." "Better," Lena said. A soft knock came at the door. Mark Ellison entered, carrying another folder. His expression was controlled, but something in it made Jonathan rise before he spoke. "What is it?" Mark glanced at Annie, then Lena. "Mrs. Ashford's attorney is already pushing a statement. They're claiming Miss Williams manipulated footage with help from a disgruntled employee, and that Mr. Pierce used the situation to force a hostile acquisition." Annie's stomach dropped. Lena muttered, "Here we go." "There's more," Mark said. "A gossip site just published Annie's address. They blurred the apartment number, but not the building." Lena stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "They what?" Jonathan's face went still. "Take it down. We're already moving. Legal notices are out. Security is being sent to the building." Annie felt suddenly cold. The room, the foundation, the applause, all of it slipped away. She saw her apartment hallway. Mr. Jenkins's cracked door, Aunt Lena coming home from the laundromat, kids on the stoop after school. Reporters would go there. Strangers might go there. People who hated the story might go there too. "I didn't ask for this," Annie said. "I know," Jonathan said. "No, you don't." Her voice rose before she could stop it. "You came in with cars and lawyers and lights, and everyone looked. Now they're looking where I live. My aunt lives there. Mr. Jenkins lives there. Little kids live there." Jonathan took the rebuke without flinching. "You're right. That disarmed her more than an argument would have." He turned to Mark. "No one approaches that building without being documented. Coordinate with local police, but no spectacle. I don't want South Side treated like a crime scene because journalists forgot their manners." "Yes, sir." Margaret was already on the phone. Lena stepped close to Annie and put a hand on her back. "Breathe." Annie tried. Her breath came uneven. Jonathan looked at her. "We can move you and your aunt tonight if you want. Hotel, private residence, anywhere safe." "No," Lena said at once. Annie looked at her. Lena's jaw was set. "We're not running out of our home because rich folks made a mess and reporters want pictures." Jonathan nodded. "Then we secure the home without taking it from you." Clara reached across the table and squeezed Annie's hand. "This is what happens when truth comes out, baby. The lie fights for air." Annie closed her eyes. "I'm tired of fighting." "I know," Clara said. "But you don't have to fight every part alone." For the next hour, the room became a command center. Margaret arranged legal action against the gossip site. Mark sent a security team to Southside, with instructions to speak respectfully to residents and coordinate with Aunt Lena, not around her. Ethan gave them the building's back entrance layout because he had once helped Annie carry costumes home and remembered the alley gate. Clara called Mrs. Alvarez, who ran the tenant association, and warned her before the news vans arrived. Annie sat through it all, learning that protection could be its own kind of noise. Near sunset, Jonathan walked her to a quieter balcony overlooking the empty stage. Below, workers removed the last gala flowers. Someone had already taken down Victoria's dressing room sign. "I owe you an apology," Jonathan said. Annie leaned against the rail. "For what?" "For thinking I could bring power into your life without bringing danger with it." She looked at him then. "Are you sorry you came?" "No." "Me neither." she said after a moment. I'm just scared. Suemi. That surprised her. You? Jonathan looked down at the stage. People think fear disappears when money arrives. It doesn't. It just changes shape. Annie thought about that. Then she looked at the empty stage, the place where the night before she had stood under light that was almost too bright to bear. What happens tomorrow? Jonathan's answer came quiet and firm. Tomorrow, we stop reacting. Tomorrow, we start building. Annie held the umbrella tighter, watching the stage below. For the first time, the future did not look simple. It looked crowded, risky, and unfinished, but it was still hers. The next morning did not begin with sunlight. It began with knocking. 3 sharp knocks struck Annie's apartment door just after 7, followed by Mr. Jenkins's voice from the hallway. Miss Lena, you up? There's folks outside asking questions. Aunt Lena was already awake. She had slept in a chair beside the window, shoes on, housecoat tied tight, as if the apartment had become a place to defend. Annie came out of her room with one sock on and the other in her hand. Reporters? Annie asked. Probably, Lena said, or people pretending not to be. She opened the door with the chain still latched. Mr. Jenkins stood there in his cardigan, holding a paper cup of coffee from the corner store. Behind him, Mrs. Alvarez from 3C had her arms crossed, and 2 younger men from the building stood near the stairs. They were not smiling. Mr. Jenkins leaned closer. News van on the curb. Man with a camera tried to get in behind Mrs. Robinson when she took out trash. Lena's jaw tightened. He came inside, didn't get past the lobby. Darnell stopped him. One of the younger men lifted a hand, told him this building ain't a zoo. Annie felt heat rise in her face. I'm sorry. Mrs. Alvarez cut her off. For what? Dancing? Being mistreated? Existing with an address? Don't start apologizing for other people's bad raising. Downstairs, a car door shut. Voices drifted up from the street, muffled through old windows and brick. Lena unlatched the chain. Come in a minute. All of you. Let me make coffee. Mrs. Alvarez stepped inside without ceremony. I brought my own. Yours tastes like punishment. It wakes people up. So does fear. Doesn't mean I want it in a mug. Despite everything, Annie smiled. By 8, the small apartment had filled with neighbors. Mr. Jenkins sat near the radiator. Mrs. Alvarez stood by the sink. Darnell and his brother leaned against the wall. Aunt Lena poured coffee into mismatched mugs while Annie sat at the table with her phone face down, afraid to touch it. A Pierce Global security car waited outside, discreet but visible. Jonathan had kept his word. 2 men in dark coats stood near the entrance, not blocking residents, not ordering people around. They greeted older tenants with "Good morning, ma'am," and held the door for a mother carrying laundry. That mattered to Lena. She watched before deciding whether to approve. They're polite, she said grudgingly. Mrs. Alvarez sniffed. Polite is good. Temporary is the question. A knock came again. This time it was softer. When Lena opened the door, Margaret Sloane stood there with Mark Ellison beside her. Margaret's hair was pulled back, her coat damp from morning mist, and she carried no cameras, no entourage, only a folder and a bakery box. I hope this isn't too early, she said. It is, Lena replied. Come in anyway. Margaret entered and set the box on the table. Bagels, cream cheese, also fruit. Mrs. Alvarez looked her over. You, the lawyer? Yes, ma'am. You brought food? Yes. Smart. Mark remained near the door until Lena pointed at him. You too. Don't hover in the hall like bad news. Yes, ma'am, Mark said, stepping in. Annie looked from one adult to another and realized something had changed overnight. Yesterday, she had been alone in rooms where power sat across from her. Today, people kept stepping closer. Not all with money, not all with legal degrees, some with coffee, some with keys, some with the kind of neighborhood loyalty that did not need a press release. Margaret opened the folder. The gossip site has removed the address after receiving legal notice. We're pursuing damages. Local police have agreed to keep a unit nearby through the weekend. Mr. Pierce also wants to offer relocation again, but he understands the answer may be no. No, Lena said. Margaret nodded. Then no. Annie looked at her. Where is Mr. Pierce? At the theater. Meeting with city officials, the the board, and investigators. He asked if you would come later. Only if you feel able. Annie's stomach tightened. Why? Because today is the first public meeting about the foundation and the theater's oversight changes. He would like your voice there, not as decoration, as a participant. Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms. She's 18 and exhausted. I know, Margaret said. Do you? Margaret paused. No, not the way she does. That answer softened the room more than a polished one would have. Annie looked down at her hands. The nails were short, one cuticle torn. Dancer's hands, server's hands, poor girl's hands. Last night those hands had held a scholarship envelope. The night before, they had held medicine to a stranger's mouth. Now everyone seemed to think they could hold a future too. I'll go, she said. Lena turned. Annie, I don't want them making plans about kids like me without someone like me in the room. Mrs. Alvarez nodded once. That's sense. Lena looked unhappy but proud. Another irritating combination. Then you eat first. The Grand Marlowe looked different in daylight with police tape removed and reporters pushed behind barricades. Workers were carrying out last night's flower arrangements. A man scrubbed scuff marks from the lobby floor. The chandelier still sparkled, but without gowns and champagne, the building seemed less untouchable, more like stone and wood and people trying to decide what kind of place it would become. Jonathan met Annie near the inner lobby. He wore a dark suit, but his tie was loosened, and there were shadows under his eyes. When he saw Aunt Lena, he straightened. Miss Williams, Mr. Pierce, thank you for coming. Thank my niece. I came because she came. Jonathan accepted that. Then he looked at Annie. How are your feet? Sore. Your heart? She did not expect the question. Still catching up. He nodded. Mine too. In the conference room, the table was larger than Aunt Lena's whole kitchen. Around it sat city arts officials, 2 members of the scholarship committee, Margaret, Mark, Mrs. Clara, Ethan, representatives from the Stagehands Union, a public school arts coordinator from Southside, and 3 community members Lena recognized from tenant and church work. Jonathan had not filled the room only with suits. Annie noticed that right away. At the far end sat Dr. Helen Morris, the scholarship president, her silver hair pinned neatly. She rose when Annie entered. Miss Williams, she said, I owe you an apology. Annie stopped near her chair. You don't have to. Yes, I do. I served on that committee. I allowed Director Whitlock to control access, recommendations, and rehearsal reports for too long. I mistook pedigree for proof. That failure helped create what happened to you. The room went quiet. Annie did not know how to receive an apology from someone who was not making excuses. Thank you, she said, because it was all she had. Jonathan began the meeting without drama. The Grand Marlowe will reopen, but not as it was. The foundation will support young artists across disciplines. The Oversight Council will include workers, students, community representatives, and outside legal review. Complaints will bypass theater management. Scholarship auditions will be recorded and independently archived. A city official in a navy suit cleared his throat. Mr. Pierce, with respect, there are established channels for these kinds of reforms. Lena muttered. Established channels let a child get robbed. The official heard her and flushed. I'm not dismissing that. Good, Lena said. Don't. Ethan presented the reporting system in plain language because Margaret made him promise not to drown everyone in technical terms. Mrs. Clara spoke about safe transportation after late rehearsals and the cost of shoes, tights, meals, and audition fees. The Southside Arts Coordinator talked about students who quit before anyone discovered they were gifted because their parents could not drive them across town or pay for application videos. Annie listened until Jonathan turned to her. What would have helped you before this week? He asked. The answer came faster than she expected. Someone checking the rooms after hours. Security? No, not like guards looking for trouble. An adult who knows some kids practice late because home is crowded, or because they work after school, or because the only open studio time is when rich students have gone home. She glanced at Clara. Someone safe. Clara nodded. A floor mother. Every old theater had one, whether they admitted it or not. Annie continued. And shoes shouldn't be a luxury. If a dancer gets into a program here, the program should make sure they can dance without bleeding through dead shoes. A few people shifted, ashamed. And don't make poor kids prove pain before they get help, Annie said. Ask early, quietly, like it's normal, because it is. Jonathan wrote that down himself. The city official looked at Annie, then at the paper in front of him. Miss Williams, would you be willing to serve as a youth advisor? I don't even know what that means. It means, Margaret said, they want your name near the work. Annie looked at Jonathan. Would I have power? Or just a chair? Jonathan answered before the official could. Power. The official nodded quickly. Yes, a vote on youth programming recommendations. Annie thought about it. Then yes, but not by myself. Add 2 more students, 1 dancer, 1 technical or backstage student. People forget artists work off stage too. Ethan whispered. Thank you. By the end of the meeting, the foundation had bones, emergency arts grants, shoe and equipment funds, safe ride vouchers, independent complaint channels, scholarship transparency, weekend classes in Southside, and a rule that no donor family could influence casting, awards, or discipline. It was not justice complete. Annie knew that. Complete justice would have stopped Whitlock the first time he looked at her like dirt. It would have made Eleanor afraid to speak that way before the words left her mouth. It would have let Mrs. Clara dance when she was 16, but late justice still had work to do. As people rose from the table, Jonathan approached Annie with a document folder. This is a draft. Nothing final without your review. Annie took it. You keep saying that, because I mean it. She studied him. Do powerful people usually mean what they say? Not often enough. At least you know. He gave a tired smile. I learned from a girl who told me being wet didn't make a man worthless. Before Annie could answer, Mark entered with his phone in hand. His expression had changed again. Jonathan noticed. What now? Victoria Ashford's team just released a statement, Mark said. They claim she was pressured by her mother and Whitlock. That she didn't understand the choreography was stolen. And that she wants to apologize publicly to Annie. Lena made a sound. Convenient. Annie looked toward the empty stage visible through the conference room glass. The girl who had taken her dance now wanted forgiveness in public. And Annie understood, with a heaviness that settled deep, that winning back the spotlight was not the same as escaping it. Annie did not answer right away. She kept looking through the glass toward the stage, where workers were coiling cables and sweeping stray glitter from the floor. Less than 24 hours ago, Victoria had stood there in costume, wearing Annie's pain like it was a dress made for her. Now her team wanted the world to hear the word apology before the word theft could harden into her name. Aunt Lena read Annie's face and stepped closer. You don't owe that girl a thing. I know, Annie said. Do you? Annie turned the folder in her hands. I know it here. She tapped her temple, then pressed her palm against her chest. Not sure about here yet. Jonathan looked to Mark. What exactly does the statement say? Mark read from his phone. Victoria Ashford is devastated by the events at the Grand Marlowe and deeply regrets any pain caused to Annie Williams. She was placed under intense pressure by adults around her and did not understand the full origin of the choreography. She hopes to apologize to Annie personally and begin a conversation about healing. Lena gave a bitter laugh. Healing. Folks love that word after they cut you. Margaret Sloan adjusted her glasses. It's a positioning statement. They're separating Victoria from Eleanor and Whitlock before charges become formal. So it's not about being sorry, Ethan said. It may be partly sorry, Margaret answered. But it is definitely legal strategy. Mrs. Clara had been quiet near the window. Now she turned, her cane planted in front of her. There's a difference between confession and performance. Don't let them put you on stage for either one unless you choose it. Annie looked at her. What would you do? Clara's mouth softened. At 18? I would have said yes because I'd have been scared of looking mean. At 63? I'd ask why the apology needs an audience. That settled the room. Jonathan spoke carefully. You can refuse. You can accept privately. You can ask for time. You can say nothing at all. Annie almost smiled. That many choices feels suspicious. Then take the simplest one, Lena said. Breathe first. But breathing was not simple anymore. Outside the conference room, phones were ringing. Attorneys were walking fast. And the city was feeding on pieces of her story. If Annie refused to hear Victoria, some people would call her bitter. If she accepted too quickly, others would say she had softened the truth. If she cried, they would replay it. If she stood straight, they would call her cold. That was the trap she had named the day before. They would not call it stealing. They would call her angry. Annie set the folder on the table. I'll meet her. No cameras. No reporters. Aunt Lena stays. Miss Clara, too. Jonathan nodded. That can be arranged. Margaret looked at her phone. They're still in the building. Victoria, her attorney, and a family representative. Eleanor has been advised not to speak with anyone. Good, Lena said, because I'm advised not to hear her. 20 minutes later, they moved to a smaller rehearsal room on the second floor. It was not Studio B, where Annie had built the dance, and Annie was glad. That room still belonged to something private inside her. This one had plain mirrors, a bar along one wall, and folding chairs placed in a loose circle. No stage, no chandelier, no audience. Victoria entered with a young attorney in a gray suit, and an older man Annie recognized as someone who had stood near the Ashford donor table at the gala. Without her costume, Victoria looked smaller. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes swollen, her face scrubbed clean of performance makeup. She stopped when she saw Annie. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria looked at Jonathan, as if expecting him to begin. Annie said, "Don't look at him. You said you wanted to apologize to me." Victoria flushed. "I do." "Then do it." The attorney shifted. "Miss Ashford would like to express—" "No," Aunt Lena said from the corner. "If your client needs you to apologize for her, we can all go home." Victoria swallowed. Her hands twisted together in front of her. "I'm sorry." The words fell flat, too small for the room. Annie waited. Victoria looked down. "I'm sorry I used your choreography. I'm sorry I didn't tell the truth when you confronted us. You stole it." Victoria's jaw tightened, then loosened. "Yes, I stole it." The attorney looked unhappy, but Margaret, standing near the door, watched him with enough warning to keep him quiet. Annie felt the sentence enter her differently than the videos had. The evidence had proved it. The confession named it. "Why?" Annie asked. Victoria blinked. "Why? You had teachers, money, costumes, time, a mother who could call anyone. Why steal from me?" Victoria's face changed. Shame came first, then something uglier because shame often did not like standing alone. "Because I saw you practice," she said, "and I knew I couldn't dance like that." The room went silent. Victoria's voice dropped. "Not technically. I can turn. I can pose. I know how to look the way they want. But you had something in that piece. I watched you fall and get up like the fall belonged there. I hated you for that." Annie stared at her. Victoria wiped one cheek quickly. "My mother said talent is only useful if people important enough can see it. She said you'd never get the lead because Whitlock wouldn't risk donors on a South Side girl. She said if I used it, the dance would have a future." Clara made a small sound, not surprise, but old recognition. Annie's voice was quiet. "So you thought my work needed your body to matter?" Victoria looked at her then. "Yes." The honesty was awful. Lena crossed her arms. At least she said it. Victoria looked toward Lena. "I know that sounds terrible." "It is terrible," Lena said. "I know." "No," Annie said. "You know now because people heard it. You knew then, and still did it." Victoria began to cry, but Annie found that tears did not move her the way she once feared they might. Maybe because she had spent too many of her own behind curtains. "I can't fix it," Victoria said. "No," Annie replied. "You can't. What do you want me to do?" The question hung there. Annie had not prepared for it. She looked at Clara, then at Aunt Lena, then at Jonathan. None of them answered for her. That helped. "I want you to tell the truth publicly," Annie said. "Not that mistakes were made. Not that adults pressured you. Say you stole it. Say you knew it was mine. Say the system protected you because you were rich and white, and it threatened me because I was poor and black." Victoria's attorney stood. "Absolutely not." Jonathan's head turned slightly. "Sit down." The attorney sat. Victoria looked frightened. "That will ruin me." Annie felt something hard and clean rise in her. "You were willing to ruin me." Victoria closed her eyes. Annie continued, "I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to start your life from the truth instead of making me carry it for you." No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, Victoria whispered, "Okay." Her attorney leaned toward her. "Victoria, I strongly advise." "I said okay," Victoria snapped, and for the first time Annie heard something in her that did not sound rehearsed. "I'm tired of everyone advising me into being worse." Aunt Lena raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Margaret stepped forward. "A written statement can be prepared. Miss Williams will review it before release." "No," Annie said. Margaret paused. "I don't want to write her apology for her. I just want it honest." Jonathan looked at Annie with approval he did not try to hide. Victoria nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Annie stood. "Good." Victoria rose too. "Annie?" Annie stopped near the door. "I really am sorry." Annie turned back. "I believe you're sorry. I don't know yet if I believe you're changed." Victoria accepted that with a small nod. Outside the room, Annie leaned against the hallway wall and let out a breath she had been holding too long. Aunt Lena came out behind her. "You handled that better than I would have." "What would you have done?" Made the lawyer cry first. Annie laughed before she could stop herself, and the sound loosened something in her chest. Jonathan joined them a moment later. "You were fair." "I didn't feel fair. Fair doesn't always feel gentle." Clara came out last, walking slowly with her cane. "Justice is not always fair when it arrives late," she said, "but it is still holy when it finally stands beside the innocent." Annie looked at her. "Did you just make that up?" Clara smiled. "Baby, I've been old a long time. We collect sentences." By evening, Victoria's statement was released. No soft language, no hiding behind pressure. She admitted she had stolen Annie's choreography, that she had knowingly allowed Annie to be threatened, and that race, money, and donor influence had protected her lie. The internet split itself open over it. Some praised her honesty. Some called it too late. Some attacked Annie anyway, because truth never stopped everyone from choosing ugliness. But the record was there. At the Grand Marlowe, Margaret printed a copy and placed it in the legal file. Ethan saved it to 3 separate archives. Mrs. Clara taped one copy inside the costume shop cabinet, not as decoration but as a warning. Annie read it once, then folded it and put it away. She did not feel healed. Not yet. But that night, when she walked through the lobby with Aunt Lena, the staff did not look at her like a scandal. They looked at her like someone who had made a door wider. At the exit, Jonathan waited beside the car. "You have school decisions coming," he said. "The scholarship committee will send formal offers, and other programs have already asked to contact you." Annie looked out at the city. The rain had stopped, but the pavement still shone under the streetlights. "Everything is moving too fast." "It is. What if I choose wrong?" "You will," Jonathan said. Annie frowned. He gave a tired smile. "Everyone does, at least once. The goal is to build a life where one wrong choice doesn't destroy you." She thought about that all the way home. For most of her life, one missed bus, one broken shoe, one angry adult, one unpaid bill could change everything. Maybe that was what money really did when used right. Not make life easy. Just give a person enough room to make a mistake and keep going. In the back seat, Aunt Lena fell asleep with her hand still wrapped around Annie's. Annie looked down at their joined hands and then out at the city passing by. Tomorrow would bring more noise, more decisions, more people wanting pieces of her story. But tonight, at least, the truth had spoken in its own name, and no one had been able to make Annie apologize for it. The next day, Annie returned to the Grand Marlowe through the front door. She stopped just before the brass handles and looked up at the carved stone above the entrance. For months, she had used the service alley, balancing trays, garment bags, and her ballet shoes against her hip while donors swept past under the main awning. The front door had never been locked to her by law. That was the trick. Some doors stayed open and still taught you not to enter. Aunt Lena stood beside her in a navy coat she called her funeral and business coat. Mrs. Clara leaned on her cane, chin raised. Ethan waited a step behind with 2 coffees and a look that said he had been awake too long and was surviving on caffeine and outrage. "You going to stare at it all morning?" Lena asked. Annie touched the umbrella handle in her hand. Jonathan had insisted she keep it now. "Just thinking. Think while walking. That's how working people get things done." Annie smiled and pulled the door open. Inside, The theater smelled of wood polish, old velvet, and coffee from a folding table set near the lobby. No chandeliers for a gala today. No champagne. No photographers. Only staff, students, parents, lawyers, city officials, and folding chairs arranged in a circle on the stage. Jonathan had chosen the stage for the meeting because, as he told Margaret, people who were kept off it should not have to sit below it while decisions are made. Annie took a seat between Clara and Aunt Lena. Across from her sat Marisol from the service staff, a young violinist from a public high school, two stagehands, Dr. Morris, Margaret, and a mother from Southside whose son painted sets, but had almost quit because bus fare cost too much. Jonathan sat near the edge, not at the center. Margaret opened the meeting. Today's purpose is practical. We are not here to admire what happened. We are here to prevent it from happening again. That might be the first sentence I've liked in this building, Lena muttered. Jonathan heard her and gave the smallest nod. Margaret continued. The Annie Williams Foundation will begin with 5 commitments: emergency grants for students, equipment and shoe funding, safe transportation after rehearsals, independent reporting for abuse or discrimination, and open auditions with archived records. Nothing will be tied to donor preference. A man from the old board shifted in his chair. We should be careful with language like abuse and discrimination before investigations conclude. Mrs. Clara turned her head slowly. Sir, I have hemmed costumes in this theater longer than you have had season tickets. If the language makes you uncomfortable, imagine how the behavior felt. No one helped him answer. The meeting moved from outrage into details, and details were harder than speeches. Who qualified for help? How fast could funds be released? Would students need to prove income? Would undocumented families be afraid to apply? Who reviewed complaints if the complaint was against someone powerful? Ethan explained the reporting platform again, this time with fewer technical words and more hand gestures. So, Lena said, a student can report something without the director deleting it. Yes. And somebody outside this building sees it? Yes. And if that somebody ignores it? Ethan looked at Margaret. Margaret answered. Then the complaint escalates to the legal oversight panel, and the advisory council receives notice that an unresolved report exists. Lena leaned back. Plain enough. Annie listened, speaking only when asked at first. She still felt strange hearing her name attached to something with bylaws. The foundation sounded too clean for the messy life that had created it. But when Dr. Morris proposed that scholarship candidates submit formal applications with professional video samples, Annie raised her hand. Dr. Morris looked toward her. Yes, Annie? Professional videos cost money. The room paused. Annie sat straighter. A lot of kids can't pay someone to film them. Some don't have a living room big enough to move in. Some only have a phone with a cracked screen, if that. If the audition requires a polished video, rich students will still look prepared before they even start. The public school arts coordinator nodded. She's right. Dr. Morris looked down at her notes. Then the foundation can host free recording days. With transportation, Annie added. And meals, Clara said. Hungry children don't perform their best. And no application fee, Lena said. The old board member looked pained. Fees help ensure seriousness. Annie turned to him. She did not raise her voice. Poverty doesn't mean a student is less serious. Sometimes it means they're serious enough to keep going without the things everyone else calls basic. The man looked away first. Jonathan wrote something down. After 2 hours, the foundation began to feel less like a rescue and more like a structure. Not perfect, not finished, but real enough to hold weight. A shoe fund would launch within the week. Emergency transportation vouchers would be available through partner schools and community centers. Mrs. Clara agreed to help design a mentorship program for late-night rehearsals, though she warned everyone she would not tolerate nonsense, foolishness, or inspirational posters without money behind them. Near noon, Margaret's phone buzzed. She read the message, then looked at Jonathan. The district attorney's office has filed initial charges against Harold Whitlock and Derek Malone. Financial charges against Eleanor Ashford and Richard Vale are pending further review. Annie's hands went still in her lap. Charges? She asked. Margaret's voice softened. Against Whitlock for bribery-related misconduct, intimidation, and evidence interference with Derek's assistance. More may follow. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Lena touched Annie's knee under the table. Breathe, Annie did. The air felt different going in. Not lighter exactly. Just less trapped. Jonathan stood. Take 15 minutes. Then we continue. People left the circle slowly. Some went for coffee. Some stepped outside to make calls. Annie stayed seated, looking out across the empty auditorium. In daylight, the rows looked smaller. The balcony where people had stood for her seemed almost ordinary. She wondered if all places of fear became ordinary once you survived them. Dr. Morris approached with 2 paper cups. She handed one to Annie. Tea, she said. I was told you don't drink much coffee. Thank you. Dr. Morris sat 1 chair away. I watched your video again this morning. The rehearsal one. Annie looked down. I hate that everyone saw me fall. I don't. Annie glanced at her. That fall told me more about your training than any clean turn could have, Dr. Morris said. You listened to your body, recovered your line, and tried again without dramatics. That is discipline. Annie let herself absorb that. Dr. Morris continued. I also owe you more than an apology. The scholarship committee wants to recommend you for the summer intensive at Ellington Conservatory. Full tuition, housing, stipend, separate from the Grand Marlowe Award. Annie's grip tightened around the cup. Ellington? Yes, that's where Victoria was trying to go. It is also where you deserve to go. The words should have thrilled her. They did. Somewhere under the fear. But another thought rose first. Aunt Lena alone in the apartment. Clara at the theater. Southside children she had promised without promising. The foundation with her name on it. The sudden weight of becoming someone other people pointed to. I don't know if I can leave, Annie said. Dr. Morris did not look surprised. Many gifted young people feel guilty the first time a door opens. It feels like walking away. Sometimes leaving is how you bring something back. Annie looked toward the stage floor, where faint marks from last night's performance still showed in the light. What if I go and I'm not enough there? Dr. Morris took a careful sip of tea. You will be behind in some ways. Ahead in others. You will meet students with better technique, better shoes, better childhoods. Some will be kind. Some will not. But no serious school is looking for a life without scars. They are looking for an artist who knows what to do with them. Annie thought of the final gesture in her dance, the hand lifted like an umbrella. Can I think about it? You should. Across the stage, Jonathan was speaking with Aunt Lena. Lena's face had that guarded look again, the one she wore whenever hope came with paperwork. Annie walked over just in time to hear her say, I don't want her indebted to you. Jonathan answered, Neither do I. Lena noticed Annie. Dr. Morris told you? Yes. And? I don't know. Lena's expression softened. Good. Don't let anybody rush you into a blessing so fast you can't read the fine print. Jonathan handed Annie a folder. Ellington's offer will be reviewed by your own counsel before you sign anything. My own counsel? Margaret, passing behind him, said, That would be us until you fire us. Annie blinked. I can fire you? Of course. Okay, I won't today. Appreciated, Margaret said, and kept walking. By late afternoon, the meeting ended with a signed interim charter. The foundation existed now, not just as a headline but as a legal entity with funding, oversight, and names attached to responsibility. Annie signed last. Her hand shook when she wrote Annie Williams on the line marked Youth Advisory Founder. Clara squeezed her shoulder. That signature is a step too, baby. Outside, the reporters were still there, but fewer now. Jonathan's team guided the group through the front exit this time. No sneaking out. No service corridor. A reporter called. Annie, are you going to forgive the Ashfords? Another shouted. Will you accept the Ellington offer? A third asked. Do you think this is about race or class? Annie stopped. Lena murmured. You don't have to. I know. Annie turned toward the microphones, the umbrella folded in her hand. It's about what happens when people with power think no one will believe the person they hurt, she said. Race is part of that. Money is part of that. Silence is part of that. I'm not here to be anyone's symbol. I just want the next student to have proof, protection, and a fair chance before a billionaire has to show up. The reporters surged with questions, but Annie stepped back. That was enough. In the car, Aunt Lena stared at her. What? Annie asked. You sounded grown. I'm 18. That is not grown. That is legally unsupervised. Annie laughed, tired but real. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the Grand Marlowe. The building no longer seemed to belong entirely to the people who had built rules around its light. It did not belong to her either. Not alone. Maybe that was the point. A theater, she was beginning to understand, was not saved by chandeliers. It was saved by the truth of the people brave enough to stand beneath them. The car had barely turned out of the theater district when Annie's phone buzzed again. She looked down and saw a number she did not recognize. For once, she answered. Hello? A woman's voice came through, warm but formal. May I speak with Annie Williams? This is Annie. Miss Williams, my name is Caroline Webb. I'm calling from Ellington Conservatory's summer intensive office. Dr. Morris said you were expecting our offer, but I wanted to call personally. Annie sat up straighter. Aunt Lena, beside her, stopped pretending not to listen. Yes, ma'am. We reviewed your performance, your rehearsal footage, and Dr. Morris's recommendation. We would like to offer you a full place in the summer intensive. Tuition, housing, meals, and a stipend for personal expenses would all be covered. The city outside the window blurred for a second. Annie had imagined Ellington for years. Not in a childish way. She had looked it up late at night on her cracked phone, memorized photos of the studios, watched student interviews, read the list of alumni who had gone on to dance in companies she had only seen on posters. Ellington had always felt less like a school and more like a country she did not have a passport to enter. Now someone was holding the gate open. That's very kind, Annie said, because her body did not know what else to do with shock. Caroline paused. You don't have to answer today. We know you've had an overwhelming few days. The formal letter has been sent to your counsel and to Dr. Morris. We simply wanted you to hear it from us first. Thank you, Annie said. Really, thank you. After she hung up, Aunt Lena looked at her. Well, it's real, Annie whispered. Lena took her hand. Then we read every word before we celebrate too loud. Annie laughed softly. You don't trust anything. I trust God, direct deposit, and receipts. Everything else gets checked. At home, the hallway was quiet, except for Mrs. Alvarez talking downstairs to one of the Pierce security men about where visitors were allowed to stand and where they were not. Miss Jenkins had taped a handwritten sign near the lobby mailboxes. Residents only. Press can go pray somewhere else. Aunt Lena snorted when she saw it. That man been waiting 20 years to put somebody out. Inside the apartment, the kitchen smelled like reheated greens, coffee, and the lemon cleaner Lena used when her nerves needed somewhere to go. Annie changed into sweatpants and sat at the table while Lena opened the Ellington letter on her tablet, reading line by line with her lips moving. Full tuition, Lena said. Housing included. Meal plan. Local transportation allowance. Stipend. Medical support through the student clinic. Medical support? You heard me. Maybe somebody over there knows dancers have human feet. Annie looked toward the radiator, where her old point shoes still rested. The right shoe had split beyond repair. Mrs. Clara had told her not to wear them again unless she wanted a lecture with scripture in it. What if I go and I'm not ready? Annie asked. Lena did not look up from the letter. You won a scholarship in dead shoes after rich folks tried to bury you. Ready might need to catch up with you. I'm serious. So am I. Lena set the tablet down. Annie, being scared of a good thing does not make it less good. Annie traced a scratch on the table. If I leave, what happens here? The foundation? The theater? The kids from Southside? The foundation got lawyers, staff, and more money than sense. Those kids need you to become what you're trying to show them they can be. Annie looked at her aunt. You'll be alone. Lena's expression changed. That was the part neither of them wanted to name. Their apartment had held grief before. Annie's mother. Empty chairs at holidays. Bills stacked under a magnet on the fridge. Leaving was not just travel. It was another kind of absence. Lena reached across the table and tapped Annie's hand. I was alone before you were old enough to know it, baby. Then you came along and made it noisy. If you go, I'll miss the noise. But I will not use love like a chain. Annie's eyes burned. Don't cry, Lena said, though her own voice thickened. If you start, I'll start, and then neither one of us will eat. That evening, Mrs. Clara came over with a cloth bag full of sewing supplies and a small white box. "I brought something," she said. Annie opened the box and found a pair of new point shoes wrapped in tissue. Not the most expensive kind, not showy, but solid, clean, fitted close to the measurements Clara knew by memory. Annie touched them as if they might disappear. "Miss Clara, before you argue, they're not from Mr. Pierce. They're from me. I bought them this afternoon with money I was saving for a recliner I didn't need." "You do need a recliner. I need you dancing more." Annie shook her head, crying now despite Aunt Lena's warning. "I can't take these." "You can, and you will. Old women like giving gifts because we know time is rude." Clara sat beside her. "I didn't get to go when doors opened late. You might. Let me have the joy of helping your feet get there." Annie held the shoes to her chest. Aunt Lena turned toward the sink and muttered, "Everybody in this apartment trying to make me cry today." Later, after Clara left and Lena went to bed, Annie stayed at the kitchen table with the new shoes, the Ellington letter, and the folded umbrella. She opened her notebook, the one where she had written choreography counts for the stolen solo. On a blank page, she wrote, "What do I owe?" She stared at the words. She owed Aunt Lena love, but not the surrender of her future. She owed Mrs. Clara respect, but not the burial of her gift. She owed Jonathan gratitude, but not obedience. She owed Southside truth, not martyrdom. She owed herself a chance. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jonathan appeared. "No decision is required tonight. Doors that matter will stay open long enough for you to walk through them with dignity." Annie read it twice. Then she typed back, "I'm afraid if I leave, people will think I forgot where I came from." His reply came a minute later. "Forgetting is not measured by distance. It is measured by what you refuse to carry back." Annie set the phone down. Outside, Southside was settling into night. A siren wailed far off, then faded. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. Pipes knocked in the wall. The apartment was small, worn, familiar. For years she had thought escape meant rejecting it. Now she wondered if leaving could be another way of honoring it, if going to Ellington could mean returning with keys for someone else. She stood, put on the new point shoes, and stepped carefully into the narrow space between the table and the stove. There was no mirror, no bar, no music, just a strip of old linoleum and the hum of the refrigerator. Annie rose onto point. Her feet hurt, but differently now, supported, held. The new shoes did not erase the wounds, but they did not deepen them either. She moved through the first phrase of her solo, small enough not to wake Lena. The turn was unfinished. The reach was quiet. The final gesture came almost by itself. One hand above her head like an umbrella, the other open in front of her, not begging, not hiding, choosing. When she lowered her arm, she knew her answer. In the morning she would tell Ellington yes. Morning found Annie awake before the alarm. She had slept only a few hours, but her mind was clear in a way that surprised her. The Ellington letter lay on the kitchen table, weighted down by the salt shaker so Aunt Lena would not accidentally bury it under grocery coupons. The new point shoes sat beside it, ribbons tucked neatly inside. Annie stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at both things as if they belonged to someone else. Aunt Lena was already at the stove, stirring oatmeal with one hand and holding her phone in the other. "You're up," Lena said without turning. "I'm saying yes." The spoon stopped. Lena turned slowly. Her face did not break open the way Annie expected. She did not clap or cry or rush across the kitchen. She just looked at her niece, long and steady, the way people look when they know a sentence has changed the size of a life. "To Ellington?" Annie nodded. "To Ellington." Lena put the spoon down and wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Say it again." "I'm going to Ellington." This time Lena did cross the kitchen. She pulled Annie into her arms and held her tight enough to make breathing difficult. "Your mama would be beside herself," Lena whispered. Annie closed her eyes. "You think so?" "I know so. She'd be acting humble in public and shouting in the car." Annie laughed against her shoulder, then cried before she could stop it. Lena let her. For once, she did not tell her to save tears for later. After breakfast, Margaret called to confirm the acceptance paperwork. By noon, The news had spread through the people who mattered before it reached the people who wanted to use it. Mrs. Clara arrived with a notebook labeled, "Things Annie Must Pack and Not Argue About." Ethan sent a message that read, "Ellington has a lighting department. Please remember the little people when famous. Mr." Jenkins knocked to say he had once delivered mail to a woman whose niece went to a music conservatory and did just fine as long as she didn't get too skinny. At 3, Jonathan asked Annie to come to the Grand Marlowe. No press, Margaret promised, just a walkthrough. Aunt Lena came with her, of course. "Walkthroughs are how people surprise you with ceremonies," she said in the car. "If there's a ribbon, I'm leaving." There was no ribbon. The theater lobby was quiet when they arrived. Workers had removed the last traces of the gala. The champagne tables were gone, the donor banners folded away, and the red carpet rolled up. Without all the decoration, the Grand Marlowe looked older, more honest. Its walls had cracks near the molding. The marble steps were worn in the middle from decades of feet. Annie liked it better this way. Jonathan waited near the auditorium doors with Mrs. Clara, Ethan, Margaret, and Dr. Morris. "You look nervous," Annie said. Jonathan glanced at Lena. "I've been told I'm not allowed to spring ceremonies on people." Lena nodded. "Good listening. This is not a ceremony," he said. "It's a question." He opened the auditorium doors. Inside, the house lights were low, but the stage was lit. At center stage stood a single wooden chair, a small table, and on the table a framed sketch of a new sign, the Annie Williams Foundation for Young Artists. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a phrase Annie had said in the meeting. "Before the shoes are dead." Annie stopped walking. "That was just something I said." Jonathan stood beside her. "Most true things are." She stepped closer to the stage. The words blurred, then sharpened again. "Before the shoes are dead." It was not polished. It was not the kind of phrase donors usually liked. It did not sound like a brochure. It sounded like a warning, a promise, and a memory of pain that had arrived too late for too many people. Mrs. Clara came up beside her. "I told him not to make it sound fancy. I noticed. Fancy gets people applause. Plain gets people help." Annie turned to Jonathan. "What's the question?" He walked to the edge of the stage and picked up a folder from the chair. "The Foundation Board wants to open its first program before you leave for Ellington. A summer shoe and transportation fund. We can name it anything you choose. But Mrs. Bell suggested the first event should happen here, on this stage, for Southside students and their families. No donors in the front row unless they are ready to listen more than speak." Lena smiled. "Miss Clara's been busy." Clara shrugged. "Retirement never took." Jonathan handed Annie the folder. "Would you be willing to teach the first class?" Annie looked up fast. "Me? Yes. I'm 18. So are the students who need to know 18 is not too young to be taken seriously." Annie looked toward the empty rows. She imagined children sitting there. Some with braids, some with scuffed sneakers, some pretending they were not impressed by the size of the room. She imagined a girl standing at the back, afraid to step forward because she had entered through too many side doors. "I don't know how to teach," Clara snorted. "You know how to survive a room. Start there," Dr. Morris said. "Technique can be taught. Permission is harder. You can give them that." Annie touched the folder. "When?" "Saturday," Jonathan said. "If you agree. That's 3 days from now." "We already have buses arranged," Ethan said. "And a simple stage setup. And a sign-up form that doesn't ask families stupid questions." Margaret added, "It asks only what we need to help them safely." Annie looked at each of them. They had not built the whole thing around a photo opportunity. They had built logistics. Buses. Shoes. Food. Forms. Adults who knew children had to get home after the inspiration ended. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." Saturday came with warm weather and a sky scrubbed clean of rain. By 9 in the morning, buses from Southside, West End, and 2 public schools pulled up in front of the Grand Marlowe. Children stepped out in clusters, some holding parents' hands, some trying to look bored, some staring up at the theater with their mouths slightly open. Volunteers handed out name tags and breakfast bags. No one asked for proof of worthiness at the door. Annie stood inside the lobby wearing a plain black leotard, warm-up pants, and the new point shoes tied over her shoulder by the ribbons. Not on her feet yet. She wanted the children to see them, to know tools mattered. A small girl with 2 puff ponytails pointed at the shoes. Are those real ballet shoes? They are, Annie said. Do they hurt? If they fit wrong, yes. If nobody helps you, more. The girl thought about that. Will somebody help us? Annie looked toward Mrs. Clara, who was already scolding a volunteer for stacking shoeboxes by size instead of student name. Yes, Annie said. Somebody will help. On stage, 28 students gathered in a loose semicircle. Some wore tights, some wore basketball shorts. One boy had tap shoes because his grandmother had misunderstood but brought him anyway. Annie told him he was welcome. A donor near the back whispered, "Is this ballet or community outreach?" Lena, seated 2 rows away, turned around. Today it's both. Keep up. Annie began with no music. Before we move, she said, I want you to know something. Nobody in this room has to prove they belong here by being perfect. You belong because you came. The children watched her. Adults watched too. She showed them how to stand at the bear, how to soften the knees, how not to lock pain inside pride. She talked about feet, balance, hunger, bus rides, and telling someone when an adult made them feel small. She did not give them a speech about dreams. She gave them practical things. How to tie ribbons. How to ask for help. How to write down choreography. How to keep copies of their work. Then she danced a short phrase from her solo. Not the whole thing, just enough. When she finished, the little girl with puff ponytails raised her hand. Do girls like us really get to dance here? The question moved through Annie with such force that for a moment she was back in the rain, back in Whitlock's office, back under stage lights trying not to break. She knelt and tied the loose lace on the child's sneaker. Yes, baby, Annie said, and one day they'll build the lights around you. From the back of the auditorium, Jonathan looked down at the umbrella resting across his knees. Aunt Lena sat beside him, arms folded, but her eyes were wet. Mrs. Clara stood near the wing, one hand pressed over her heart. The class ended with children running across the stage in lines, laughing when they missed counts, trying again when Annie clapped the rhythm. It was messy, noisy, alive. It was not the Grand Marlowe the donors had protected for themselves. It was better. When the last bus pulled away, Annie remained on the stage. The afternoon light reached in from the high windows and crossed the floor in long, pale bands. Jonathan walked up the side steps and stood near her. You gave them more than dance today, he said. Annie looked at the empty seats. They gave me something too. What? She thought for a moment. A reason to leave without feeling like I'm disappearing. Jonathan nodded. Ellington will be lucky. No, Annie said with a small smile. Ellington will be difficult. He laughed quietly. That too. Annie stood center stage and looked out at the room, no longer afraid of its size. In a few weeks, she would leave Southside for a school she had once only seen on a cracked screen. But part of her would remain here now, not trapped in the shadows, not carrying trays beside people who did not know her name. Here, in this old theater, a door had been made wider, and for the first time, Annie believed it would stay open. 2 weeks after the first class, the Grand Marlowe's old boardroom became a place people avoided for different reasons. Before, students avoided it because decisions were made there about their futures without their voices. Staff avoided it because directors called them in only when something had gone wrong. Now attorneys, auditors, and investigators moved through it with boxes of files, laptops, and expressions that made people lower their voices in the hallway. Harold Whitlock's name came down from the office door first. Mrs. Clara stood nearby when the maintenance man removed the brass plate. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She just watched the screws come loose one by one. Want to keep it? Ethan asked. Clara looked offended. For what? To scare mice? He grinned. Fair. The man handed the plate to a Pierce staffer, who placed it in an evidence box along with old contracts, donor correspondence, and a set of private account statements that had made even Margaret Sloan go quiet. By noon, the district attorney's office released formal updates. Harold Whitlock faced charges tied to bribery, intimidation, and concealment of evidence. Derek Malone, the former security director, had been charged with tampering with surveillance records and threatening staff. Richard Vale's offices had been searched. Eleanor Ashford was under federal financial review after investigators found payments routed through charitable accounts, consulting fees, and donor pledges meant to look respectable from a distance. Respectable had become a word Annie distrusted. She sat in the costume shop with Mrs. Clara when the news broke. Clara was repairing a sleeve for the children's summer showcase. Annie was sorting donated ballet shoes by size, checking each pair for wear the way Clara had taught her. "Don't hand a child a dead shoe and call it charity," Clara said without looking up. "I know. You say you know, but check that box again. That satin's too soft." Annie picked up the shoe and pressed the toe. Clara was right. "How do you always know?" "Because I have been angry longer than you've been alive." Annie set the shoe in the discard pile. Her phone buzzed on the table. Another news alert. She did not open it. Clara noticed. "You don't want to see? I already know enough." "That's a healthy sentence. Keep it." Annie tried to focus on the shoes, but her mind kept drifting to Victoria. After the public statement, Victoria had disappeared from the theater and from the polished social pages that once treated her like a future star. Some people said she had left town. Some said her mother had sent her to stay with relatives. Online, strangers were either tearing her apart or defending her as another victim of wealthy parents. Annie did not know what to do with either version. Victoria had been pressured. Yes, she had also chosen. Both could be true. Annie was learning that truth often refused to stand in one clean line. A soft knock came at the costume shop door. Marisol leaned in. "Annie? Mr. Pierce is asking for you downstairs." "Not urgent," he said. "But Mr. Pierce's not urgent still feels like regular urgent." Clara snorted. "Tell him she'll come when she finishes this box." Marisol's eyes widened. "Should I really say that?" Jonathan's voice came from behind her. "No need. I heard it." He stepped into the doorway, careful not to cross the threshold without Clara's permission. He had learned quickly that the costume shop was her kingdom, and kingdoms had rules. Clara looked over her glasses. "You need something?" "Yes, ma'am. Annie's signature on a final document, if she is willing." "What document?" Jonathan held up a folder. "Transfer of a restricted endowment into the foundation. It guarantees funding for the first 10 years. Clara set down her needle. 10 years? At minimum. Annie stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "How much?" Jonathan paused. Clara narrowed her eyes. "Don't you dare mumble rich." $50 million. The room went still. Marisol whispered, "Jesus." Clara leaned back in her chair. "That'll buy a few shoes." "It will buy shoes, transportation, meals, legal advocacy, training, emergency housing support, and salaries for program staff," Jonathan said. "If the advisory council approves." Annie stared at the folder. "Why do you need my signature?" "Because we agreed the foundation would not become a monument to my guilt or my name. This fund is restricted to the mission you helped define. Your signature confirms the Youth Advisory Council reviewed it." "I'm not a lawyer." "No. That's why Margaret reviewed it first. Your signature does not make you responsible for the money. It confirms you were not bypassed." Annie looked at Clara. Clara gave a short nod. "That's different from being used." Downstairs, Margaret walked Annie through the document in plain English, while Aunt Lena listened by speakerphone from work and interrupted twice. "Read that sentence again." Margaret did. "Now say it like I sell detergent for a living." Margaret translated. "Better," Lena said. Annie signed. Her hand did not shake this time. That afternoon, the Grand Marlowe held no press conference. Jonathan refused one. Instead, the foundation posted the announcement online with a simple statement. "Funding belongs to the work, not the donor." Applications for the first grants would open the following Monday. Free shoe fittings would begin at Southside Community Center, West End Arts Hall, and the Grand Marlowe lobby. Safe ride vouchers would be available for students rehearsing after dark. The response came fast. Emails arrived from parents, teachers, churches, school counselors, community centers, and children using their parents' phones. Some messages were polished. Others had typos, missing punctuation, and urgency pressed into every line. "My daughter dances in socks because shoes cost too much. My son plays trumpet but we can't afford repairs. Is this only for ballet? Can someone help my niece get to auditions safely? Do you help kids who are shy? Annie read that last one twice. Yes, she said softly. Ethan, sitting across from her at the temporary intake table, looked up. What? We help shy kids too. He nodded as if adding it to an invisible policy. Especially them. By the end of the week, the theater had changed in ways small enough that outsiders might miss them. The staff entrance was repaired and repainted, but students were no longer required to use it unless they wanted to. A notice appeared near every rehearsal room with a number to report abuse, discrimination, unsafe conditions, or retaliation. Studio schedules included protected late-hour practice blocks supervised by trained adults. The cafeteria stopped throwing away unsold food before offering it to students. A shelf near the costume shop held emergency supplies, socks, bandages, granola bars, water, hair ties, and prepaid transit cards. Mrs. Clara called it common sense with funding. For Annie, the hardest change was not the building. It was being seen. People still stopped her. Some wanted to thank her. Some wanted to tell her their own stories. Some wanted a photograph. Most were kind. But kindness could still be tiring when it arrived in a crowd. Jonathan noticed before Annie said anything. One evening, as they watched the second children's class finish, he said, "You can step back." Annie looked at him. From what? From being available to everyone. I don't want to seem ungrateful. Gratitude is not the same as exhaustion. She considered that. Did someone teach you that? No, I learned it too late. On Annie's last Friday before Ellington, the theater staff gathered after closing. Not a gala. No chandeliers lowered, no gowns, no reporters. Just folding tables in the lobby, trays of baked ziti, fried chicken, salad, lemonade, grocery store cake, and coffee, strong enough to make Clara suspicious. Aunt Lena brought peach cobbler in 2 foil pans and warned everyone not to ask for the recipe. Mr. Jenkins came in a suit from another decade and told 3 different people he had known Annie since she was knee-high and opinionated. Marisol made a playlist too loud until Clara threatened to unplug the speaker. Jonathan stood near the back, watching Annie move from group to group. She hugged stagehands, thanked ushers, laughed when Ethan presented her with a flashlight, in case Ellington doesn't understand lighting emergencies, and cried when Clara gave her a sewing kit with her initials stitched inside. You'll need this, Clara said. Even fancy places lose buttons. Annie held the kit carefully. I don't know how to thank you. Learn, dance, come back without acting brand new. Aunt Lena appeared beside them. She acts brand new, call me. I will, Clara said. Later, Jonathan handed Annie a small envelope. Not money, he said before she could protest. Inside was a photograph. It showed the bus shelter from the night of the rain, taken by one of his security vehicles after Annie had left. Jonathan sat beneath the bent black umbrella, soaked and pale, holding the handle with both hands. The image was blurred by rain, but unmistakable. Annie swallowed. Why would you keep this? To remember the truth of the transaction. What transaction? He looked at her. You gave protection when no one was watching. Everything after that is interest. Annie shook her head but smiled. That sounds like something a billionaire would say. Unfortunately, I am one. The following morning, formal indictments were announced. Whitlock resigned through his attorney. Derek pleaded not guilty. Richard Vale's partners began distancing themselves. Eleanor Ashford's foundation froze public activity. For once, money did not make the story disappear. There were too many records, too many witnesses, too many people who had finally decided not to look away. Annie watched the news with Aunt Lena over breakfast. When Whitlock's photo appeared, Lena turned the volume down. You all right? Annie thought about the office, the coffee cup hitting the desk, the word Southside used like a stain. I thought this would feel bigger, Annie said. Justice? Yeah, Lena buttered toast. Sometimes justice feels like thunder. Sometimes it feels like being able to eat breakfast without the liar still holding your future. Annie looked at the screen again. That's enough? For today, Lena said. Tomorrow may ask for more. Annie nodded. That night, she packed for Ellington. 2 leotards, 3 pairs of tights, the new point shoes, Clara's sewing kit, the scholarship letters, a framed photo of her mother, and the folded umbrella. Aunt Lena watched from the doorway, pretending to supervise but really memorizing the sight. You taking that old umbrella? Annie placed it along the side of the suitcase. Yes. You know they sell umbrellas where you're going. Not this one. Lena leaned against the doorframe. No, not that one. Annie zipped the suitcase and sat on the bed. The room looked bare already. I'm scared again, she admitted. Lena came and sat beside her. Good. Means you understand it matters. What if I miss home? Call. What if I fail? Call. What if I love it? Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she put an arm around Annie's shoulders. Call then too, she said. Outside, Southside hummed with its usual night sounds. Cars passing, someone laughing on the sidewalk, a dog barking 2 buildings over, the radiator knocking even though it was not cold enough to need heat. Annie had once thought these sounds were proof of everything she needed to escape. Now they sounded like roots. In the morning she would leave, but she would not be leaving empty-handed. And she would not be leaving alone. The theater was changing. The foundation had begun. The people who tried to bury her were facing consequences. Children had already danced under lights they were once taught to fear. Annie lay down with her suitcase beside the bed. For the first time in days, sleep came gently. At dawn, Aunt Lena made breakfast like Annie was leaving for war instead of a summer intensive. There were eggs, toast, oatmeal, sliced oranges, and coffee. Annie was not allowed to drink because Lena said one nervous girl and caffeine could shake the whole building. The suitcase waited by the door. The old black umbrella lay across the top, its bent rib repaired but still visible, like a scar that had decided not to hide. Annie ate because Lena watched every bite. You packed your documents? Lena asked. Yes. Scholarship letter? Yes. Clara's sewing kit? Yes. Emergency cash? Annie looked up. You gave me emergency cash? Lena pointed at the front pocket of the suitcase. Don't act rich. It's $40 and a warning. Annie smiled, but it faded quickly. The apartment seemed too small and too large at the same time. Every object had become personal overnight. The chipped blue mug by the sink, the radiator that knocked in winter, the thrift store poster of Misty Copeland curling above her bed, the chair where Lena had waited up after late shifts. Annie had spent years dreaming of leaving. Now leaving had weight. A knock came at the door. Mr. Jenkins stood in the hall wearing his brown cardigan, holding a paper bag. Mrs. Alvarez stood beside him with her arms crossed as usual, though her eyes looked suspiciously wet. Behind them, Darnell and his brother waited near the stairs. Mr. Jenkins handed Annie the bag. Bus, snacks. I'm not taking a bus, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Pierce sent a car. I know what I said. He tapped the bag. You get hungry in rich folks' cars too. Annie opened it and saw peanut butter crackers, peppermints, and a small bottle of orange juice. Thank you, she said. Mrs. Alvarez pulled her into a hug before Annie could prepare for it. Don't let them make you small over there. I won't. And don't let them make you ashamed of needing help. Annie nodded, but Mrs. Alvarez held her by the shoulders. I mean it. Pride is good until it starts working for the people who want you tired. Lena pointed at her. That one's going in my church notebook. Downstairs, a black car waited at the curb. Not a full fleet this time. Just one car, one driver, and Jonathan Pierce standing beside the rear door with both hands folded in front of him. He had learned not to turn Annie's life into a parade unless the parade was needed. He greeted Lena first. Miss Williams, Mr. Pierce. Then he looked at Annie. Ready? No. He nodded. Good. Most honest answer. The ride to the station was quiet at first. Annie sat between Lena and her suitcase, watching Southside pass through the window. The corner store, the bus shelter 3 blocks down, the church with the peeling sign, the laundromat where Lena worked, the cracked sidewalk where children jumped over puddles after summer storms. None of it looked like something she had escaped. It looked like something she was carrying. Jonathan sat across from them. He did not fill the silence. Annie appreciated that. At the train station, Margaret Sloane was waiting near the entrance with the Ellington travel packet, tickets, and enough printed documents to satisfy Aunt Lena. Mrs. Clara stood beside her in a lavender cardigan, holding a garment bag and looking annoyed that anyone might suspect she was emotional. Ethan stood with 2 coffees and a paper sign that read, Don't forget the lighting people. Annie laughed when she saw it. That's going in my dorm, she said. It better, Ethan replied. Representation matters. Mrs. Clara handed Annie the garment bag. Practice skirt. 2 leotards. 1 decent wrap sweater. Don't wash the darks with the lights, unless you want everything looking like regret. Yes, ma'am. Clara looked down at Annie's shoes, then back up. And if anyone tells you pain is just part of art, you tell them pain is information, not rent. You do not have to live in it. Annie's throat tightened. I'll call you. You better. And not just when something's wrong. Old people like good news too. The boarding announcement echoed through the station. Aunt Lena's hand found Annie's and held tight. For a moment, neither moved. I don't know how to do this part, Annie whispered. Me neither, Lena said. We'll do it ugly if we have to. That made Annie cry. Lena wiped her cheek with her thumb, the same way she had when Annie was little and fell on the sidewalk. Listen to me. You are not going up there to prove Southside deserves respect. Southside deserved respect before you ever put on ballet shoes. You are not going to prove black girls can dance. We knew that already. You are going because your gift needs room, and because your mama didn't raise you through me just so fear could keep you local. Annie nodded, crying harder now. And call when you get there, Lena added. I will. And when you eat. Aunt Lena. I said what I said. Jonathan stepped closer, but not too close. Before you go, there's something I need to return. He reached into the car and brought out the black umbrella. Annie frowned. I thought it was in my suitcase. That one is yours. He held this one out. This is also yours. I had two made from the same frame. One to travel with you. One to remain at the Grand Marlowe in the foundation office. But this original belongs in your hands today. Annie took it slowly. The handle had been polished, the torn seam repaired, but it was still the same umbrella she had pressed into his trembling hand under the rain. Jonathan looked at it, then at her. Your $15 umbrella protected my life in the rain. Tonight, I used my entire empire to protect your dream. Annie had heard him say powerful things in full rooms, but this sentence was different. It did not sound like a speech. It sounded like a promise he had made to himself and was letting her overhear. You didn't have to do all that, she said. Yes, he replied. I did. She looked up. Jonathan's voice lowered. Not because you saved a billionaire. You saved a man when he had no name useful to you. The world becomes cruel when people only help the powerful before they know they are powerful. Annie held the umbrella close. What happens to the foundation while I'm gone? It works, he said. And it reports to you. Not every day. Not enough to steal your focus. But enough that you know the door stayed open. Aunt Lena gave him a hard look. I'll be checking too. I assume so. Good. The final boarding call came. Annie hugged Ethan first. He made a joke about stage lights, then lost his voice halfway through it. She hugged Mrs. Clara next. Clara held her longer than expected. Go be difficult, Clara whispered. I thought I was supposed to be graceful. You can be both. Then Annie turned to Aunt Lena. There was no quick way to say goodbye to the woman who had raised her. Annie pressed her face into Lena's shoulder and breathed in laundry soap, coffee, and home. I'm scared, Annie said. I know. I'm happy. I know that too. I'll come back. Lena pulled back and looked her in the eye. Baby, coming back ain't always about geography. Just don't forget how to recognize your people. Annie nodded. She boarded with the umbrella in one hand and the garment bag in the other. At the train door, she turned. Lena stood straight, not waving at first. Clara did wave. Ethan held up his sign. Jonathan stood with his hands folded, watching like a man who understood that some debts could only be honored by letting the person walk forward. As the train pulled away, Annie pressed her palm to the window. Southside gave way to downtown. Downtown gave way to tracks, warehouses, small houses, strips of highway, and morning light stretching over the city she was leaving. Annie sat back and looked at the umbrella beside her. A cheap thing, a practical thing, a thing that had gone from a drugstore rack to a storm, from a dying man's hand to a theater's rebirth, and now to a train heading toward the next version of her life. She opened her notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a clean page. Do not make the room smaller to fit inside it. Months passed. Ellington was hard in ways Annie had expected, and harder in ways she had not. Some students were kind. Some looked at her scholarship and saw charity before they saw work. Some teachers pushed her technique until she went back to her dorm with muscles shaking. She was behind in certain vocabulary, ahead in musicality, stubborn in the turns, unforgettable in the floor work. Once, after a difficult class, she cried in a bathroom stall, called Aunt Lena, and said she did not belong there. Lena answered, "Are you in the building?" "Yes." "Then belong louder." So Annie stayed. At the Grand Marlowe, the foundation grew. The first shoe fund served 43 students. The Safe Ride program brought children home after rehearsals without making their parents choose between overtime and safety. The anonymous reporting system led to investigations at 2 partner schools. Mrs. Clara ran mentorship like a general with a pincushion. Ethan built archives no director could erase. Jonathan funded the work and, to his credit, learned when to step back. In winter, Annie returned for the foundation's first public showcase. The Grand Marlowe was full, but not like the gala. This audience wore church coats, work boots, nurse scrubs, school uniforms, cardigans, braids, gray hair, and Sunday pearls. The front rows were reserved for families, not donors. Children ran backstage. Clara shouted for somebody to stop touching the curtains. Ethan's lights warmed the stage. Aunt Lena sat in the center row, already crying before anything began. Jonathan sat near the back, not in a box, not under his name, just a seat by the aisle where he could see the stage and the door. Before the showcase, Annie walked alone to center stage. She wore a simple black dress over her dance clothes, her hair pulled back, the umbrella folded in her hand. The room quieted. "A year ago," she said, "I thought getting on a stage meant escaping where I came from. I was wrong. A stage is not escape if you use it right. It is a place to tell the truth loud enough for home to hear it too." She looked toward the children waiting in the wings. "This theater once taught people like me to enter quietly. Now we are learning to enter together." The applause came warm and full. After the children performed, after the bows, after Aunt Lena hugged every child within reach, Annie found Jonathan near the lobby windows. Snow fell outside, soft against the glass. "You kept your promise," she said. Jonathan looked toward the stage, where a little girl with puffed ponytails was showing her grandmother how to stand in first position. "So did you. I didn't promise anything." "Yes, you did," he said. "When you stopped in the rain," Annie smiled. "You make everything sound like a contract. Unfortunately, I remain a businessman." She laughed, then looked down at the umbrella in her hands. "I used to think this was just something I gave away. And now? Now I think it was the first time I understood what kind of person I wanted to be, even if nobody rewarded it." Jonathan nodded. "That is the only kind that matters." Across the lobby, the foundation office door stood open. On the wall inside hung the second umbrella, mounted in a plain frame above the words, "Before the shoes are dead." Annie watched a young boy stop and read it. His mother bent to explain. He nodded with the serious face children make when they understand more than adults expect. Later that evening, when the theater emptied and the stage lights dimmed, Annie stepped back onto the floor alone. No gala crowd, no stolen dance, no accusation, no rain, just the old theater breathing around her. She opened the umbrella once, slowly, beneath the stage lights. Then she closed it, not because the storm had never happened, but because it no longer owned the ending. And the city that once walked past Annie Williams in the rain finally stood still long enough to watch her rise. The lesson of Annie's story is that kindness is never small when it is given at the right moment. Annie did not help the stranger because he was rich, powerful, or important. She helped him because he was human. In return, her simple act of compassion exposed a world of injustice, racism, and privilege that had been hiding behind polished walls and beautiful music. The story reminds us that true character is shown when no one is watching, and true power is meaningful only when it protects the weak, restores dignity, and opens doors for those who have been kept outside. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.